10 most painful way to die in 40K. There are fates in 40K that make death look like a vacation. The galaxy's cruelest minds have perfected suffering into an art form. Torments so absolute that victims pray for oblivion that will never arrive. Today, we're unveiling the 10 most agonizing deaths in the 41st millennium. Not quick battlefield executions or heroic last stands. These are systematic horrors that break the soul before they destroy the body. Fates that echo across eternity. Picture this: a space marine frozen mid-scream within a crystalline prison, his face locked in an expression of absolute rage and despair. Brother Captain Aldrich of the Silver Skulls, he's been screaming inside his own mind for 300 years. His body cannot move, his lungs cannot draw breath, but his consciousness remains trapped in that single, eternal moment of capture. Aware, thinking, remembering, for 3 centuries. And somehow, that's not even the worst thing on this list. See, the Warhammer 40K universe operates on rules that make suffering infinitely worse than anything our reality can produce. The warp exists, that roiling dimension of psychic energy running parallel to normal space. It doesn't just transport ships. It's a realm where thought becomes reality, where emotions manifest as hungry, predatory entities, where pain itself is a form of currency that gods trade and hoard. The chaos. Gods don't just enjoy suffering. They are sustained by it, nurtured by it, grown fat on the screams of countless souls across 10,000 years of endless war. This creates an economy of anguish, where the most powerful beings in existence actively cultivate torment on industrial scales. Then there's the technology. The Imperium and its enemies have advanced far enough to make death entirely optional. Servitor conversion keeps partially aware minds functioning indefinitely. Stasis fields freeze moments of agony across centuries. Rejuvenate treatments restore bodies, specifically so they can be broken again. The 41st millennium has conquered death, and used that conquest to make suffering eternal. And it gets worse. The psychic nature of humanity means pain isn't merely physical. A powerful psyker doesn't just feel their body being destroyed. They experience their soul being shredded, their identity consumed, their memories devoured one by one, while they remain conscious enough to feel each piece of themselves being stripped away. This is where we introduce the concept of soul death versus physical death. Many of the fates we're about to describe don't actually kill the victim in any traditional sense. The body may cease to function, but the consciousness persists, trapped in states far worse than any hell imagined by ancient religions. And here's the truly horrifying part. The scale of this universe means these torments aren't isolated incidents. They're not rare, unfortunate accidents that happen to a handful of unlucky souls. The deaths we're about to describe happen to millions across the galaxy every single day. Industrial-scale suffering is the baseline of existence in the 41st millennium. It's not the exception. It's the foundation everything else is built upon. So what we're going to do is journey through the most nightmarish fates this setting has ever devised. From the psychic predation of alien horrors to the metaphysical torments of the warp itself. We'll work our way from the merely catastrophic up to the absolutely unthinkable. And we'll end with a fate so terrible that even the dark gods themselves consider it excessive. You think you've seen grimdark, bolter wounds, chains ward dismemberments, exterminatus-level destruction. Those are merciful compared to what follows. Those deaths end. What's coming are the torments that never end. The fates that make space marines weep and inquisitors pray for quick execution if captured. Welcome to the 10 most painful ways to die in Warhammer 40K. Before we can even begin the countdown, we need to establish some ground rules. We have to understand why pain in the 41st millennium is so uniquely, so exquisitely awful. This universe doesn't operate according to our reality. It has its own physics of suffering, and there are a few core pillars that hold up its entire, horrifying cathedral of agony. First, there is the warp, the immaterium. Think of it not just as a medium for faster-than-light travel, but as a parallel dimension, a psychic ocean of raw, unfiltered emotion that mirrors our own reality. Every flicker of hope, every surge of rage, every scream of pain from every living being in the galaxy echoes into this sea. And in that sea, things have grown. The Chaos Gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, are not just malevolent deities. They are literal gods of emotion, formed and sustained by the psychic runoff of mortals. They don't just enjoy suffering, they metabolize it. Pain is their food. Anguish is their ambrosia. This creates what can only be described as an economy of torment. Powerful beings, from the mightiest demon prince to the lowliest cultist, actively cultivate and harvest suffering on a scale that would beggar belief. Because in the 41st millennium, a planet screaming in unison is a resource to be tapped. Second, technology has progressed to a point of profound cruelty. The science of the 41st millennium, much of it inherited from a long-lost golden age, has effectively conquered death. But instead of ushering in an era of peace, this mastery has been turned into a tool of indefinite torment. A criminal is not simply executed. Their brain is wiped, their limbs replaced with machinery, and they are turned into a servitor, a mindless biological drone that often retains just enough of its former self to understand its new, pathetic existence. A hated enemy isn't killed. They're frozen in a stasis field, their last moment of agony preserved for centuries as a trophy. Rejuvenate treatments, capable of healing grievous wounds, are used by torturers to repair their victims, specifically so the process can begin anew. Humanity has stared into the face of mortality and defeated it, only to chain its corpse to a torture rack for all eternity. Third, the very nature of humanity itself. In 40K, you are not just a body, you are a consciousness, a soul, a spark of psychic energy. For most, this is a dim ember, but for psychers, it is a blazing fire, a beacon in the darkness of the warp. This makes them uniquely vulnerable. When a normal human dies, the pain is limited to their nervous system. But when a psyker is tormented, their very essence is on the line. They don't just feel their body being broken, they feel their soul being flayed, their memories being siphoned away one by one, their identity being consumed by predatory things from the warp. The pain is not just physical, it is metaphysical, it is existential. And this brings us to the final, most important rule, the crucial difference between physical death and soul death. In 40K, the destruction of the body is often just the beginning of your problems. A quick death is a luxury rarely afforded. For many, the body ceases, but the consciousness is captured, preserved, and subjected to torments that physical form could never endure. You might become a disembodied spirit trapped in a demon's gut, an echo of a mind screaming inside a hive fleet, or a mode of awareness fused into a weapon. This is soul death, the state of being where you can no longer die, but you are forced to exist forever in pain. And the truly chilling part? The scale. These fates aren't rare. They are not the stuff of legend, happening to one unlucky hero a century. They are the galaxy's brutal, grinding reality. Every single day, millions are taken. Millions are converted. Millions are consumed. The horrors we are about to detail are the background radiation of life in the 41st millennium. It is the baseline from which all other suffering is measured. Our descent begins at number 10. Here, we leave behind the philosophical horrors of the Imperium and turn our gaze to the cold, uncaring void between stars. We find a threat that does not bargain, a terror that does not seek to corrupt. It has no interest in your soul, your loyalty, or your service to its dark gods. It only wants your matter. This is the Tyrannid, a galaxy-devouring swarm that does not conquer or enslave, but simply and totally consumes. Where chaos offers a twisted form of immortality, and the Necrons offer the cold peace of oblivion, the Tyrannids offer something uniquely horrifying: reduction. You will become nothing more than raw biological material, nutrients for the great devourer. To understand this fate, we travel to the agri-world of Valdris Prime, approximately 15 years before its name would be struck from all Imperial star charts. Valdris is a jewel, a peaceful, productive world in the segmentum Pacificus. Its continents are vast, rolling oceans of golden grain, genetically engineered to feed a dozen nearby hive worlds. Its hab blocks are orderly, its skies are clear, and its modest planetary defense force has not fired a shot in anger for 5 generations. In her high spire, Governor Helena Moritz scans the daily tithe reports. The numbers are good. The harvest is bountiful. She receives a minor report from an orbital auspex station detailing strange meteorological phenomena in the system's outer asteroid belt. She dismisses it with a wave of her hand. Solar interference, nothing more. She is wrong. Deep below her spire, in the steaming, recycled air of the capital city's underhive, the first infection has already taken root. It began subtly in the protein reclamation facilities, where the planet's organic waste is processed. A single genestealer, carried on a tramp freighter decades ago, has been busy. Now, whole families of workers have changed. They are more diligent, more focused. They are also more secretive, gathering in disused maintenance tunnels after their shifts, their faces lit by repurposed glow globes. They have formed a new faith, a tight-knit community that whispers of a divine prophecy. They worship something they call the coming angels, a host of star-born saviors who will descend from the heavens to deliver them from their toil. Among them is a man named Brother Cyrus. He is a third-generation hybrid, his human features subtly warped by Xeno's genetics. He looks at his flock, at their hopeful faces, and he feels a righteous certainty. He genuinely believes he is saving his world. The Star Children are coming, and they will lift the faithful into a glorious new unity. He preaches of a great communion, a final merging with the divine. He doesn't know how right he is. Miles above him, on the sun-drenched surface, a young girl named Sarah chases a skylark through the endless fields of grain. Her family has worked these lands for centuries. She knows nothing of the secret church in the depths, or the strange stellar phenomena at the edge of her solar system. She knows only the warmth of the sun, the smell of the harvest, and the feel of the rich soil beneath her bare feet. This is the insidious genius of the Tyrannid method. They do not arrive with the crash and thunder of an orc way, or the terrifying splendor of a chaos fleet. They are patient. They are subtle. They send their vanguard organisms, the genestealers, to infiltrate, to infect, and to slowly, methodically, twist the planet's own population against itself. By the time the main hive fleet darkens the sky, the world has been preparing for its own consumption for generations. Governor Moritz, Brother Cyrus, and young Sarah will each experience this consumption. Each will learn the true meaning of being devoured, and for none of them will it be quick. The hope preached by Brother Cyrus dies the moment the sky breaks. It does not break with light, but with darkness. A shadow falls over Valdris Prime, a choking absolute eclipse that is not planetary, but biological. Billions upon billions of mycetic spores, each a fleshy pod larger than a man, descend through the upper atmosphere, a storm of living dropships that blots out the sun entirely. The world is plunged into a permanent, terrifying twilight. From her command bunker, Governor Moritz watches her world's vibrant blue and green hues fade on the monitors, replaced by a sickly, bruised purple. Then, the planet begins to bleed. From the impact sites of the largest spores, things begin to grow. They are not buildings, not weapons, but colossal biological tubes, capillary towers, each one miles high, that punch through the soil and bedrock and begin to drink. They are the straws of the hive mind. The first thing they take is the air. The sky, already dark, shifts in color, from purple to a toxic, coppery red, then to a nauseating green as the atmospheric composition is fundamentally altered. The oceans begin to recede, pulled up into the heavens by these titanic organic pumps, feeding the swathe of bioships that wait in orbit, like gargantuan, patient ticks. On the ground, the slaughter is not a war, it is a harvest. The bioweapons of the Tyranids are not designed for clean kills. They are instruments of pre-digestion. Devourer weapons fire swarms of beetle-like organisms that don't just impact a target. They burrow into flesh, their sole purpose to lay eggs that will hatch within minutes, the larvae eating their way out over hours of screaming agony. Flesh-borer weapons launch larger, hungrier creatures that chew through armor as if it were paper, continuing into the body beneath, gnawing and consuming as they go. This isn't combat. It's butchery on a planetary scale. But the true horror, the fate that lands the Tyranids on this list, begins when the digestion pools form. As the planet's biomass is broken down, vast, continent-sized lakes of viscous, shimmering bioacid begin to cover the surface. Everything is rendered down here: buildings, forests, vehicles, and people. And the acid is a masterpiece of malevolent biology. It is precisely calibrated not to dissolve its victims in seconds, but over hours. It keeps nerve endings intact and firing, ensuring the victim remains conscious, feeling every single moment as they are systematically unmade, molecule by agonizing molecule. A PDF trooper named Marcos learns this firsthand. During a desperate, doomed rearguard action near the capital, his squad is overrun. A clawed monstrosity hurls him from a shattered hab block, and he lands in the steaming shallows of a newly formed digestion pool. The pain is immediate and absolute. He watches his flak armor bubble and dissolve into gray slush. Then the acid finds his skin. He screams, but the sound is lost in the glutinous fluid. He feels the layers of his own body being peeled away. First the skin, then the fat, then the layers of muscle he spent his life building. He can feel the acid seeping into his bones, his organs liquefying within him. Through it all, his mind is a perfect, crystalline shard of agony. He is completely, horrifically aware. He feels himself ceasing to be, not in a rush of violence, but in a slow, meticulous deconstruction. It takes 17 hours for his brain, starved of oxygen and ravaged by the acid, to finally grant him the mercy of unconsciousness. His heart continues to beat for another 3 hours after that, a stubborn, pointless rhythm in the nutrient slurry that was once a man. Marcos has been processed, and across Valdris Prime, billions more are sharing his fate. The final transmission from the surface of Valdris Prime was not a plea for aid or a defiant curse. It was the sound of the planetary Vox network screaming as a billion voices were simultaneously silenced by the rising tide of bioacid. Then, nothing. In her command bunker, buried 5 miles beneath the capital, Governor Helena Moritz watched the last of her world's vital signs flatline. The oceans were gone. The atmosphere was poison. The population was slurry. Her world was dead. She was simply the last ghost haunting its corpse. But her specific fate, the one that earns the Tyranids their place on this list, was not to be simple consumption. Moritz was a psyker, not a powerful one, merely a sanctioned telepath of moderate talent. But in the silent darkness of space, even the whisper of a psychic mind is a beacon. And the hive mind had noticed her as the final plasteel blast door to her sanctum began to bubble and dissolve, not from weapon fire, but from corrosive enzymes. She knew. They weren't coming to kill her. They were coming to collect her. The things that entered were not mindless warriors. They were specialized bioforms, moving with a chilling, surgical precision. They did not tear her apart. They captured her, their movements economical and swift, and dragged her from the tomb of her command center up into the nightmare her world had become. She was brought before a Norn queen, a being that was less a creature and more a living, pulsating continent of synaptic tissue and cerebral matter. It was one of the great biological supercomputers that guided the swarm, and it had a special purpose for minds like hers. What followed was not an interrogation. It was an audit. The Norn Queen did not want to break her will. It wanted to absorb her assets. The process began as a psychic tendril, impossibly vast, slid into her consciousness. It did not tear or shred. It began to catalog. Moritz felt her entire existence being methodically deconstructed, not in a rush of pain, but with the cold, detached efficiency of a librarian taking inventory. She experienced her life in reverse. She felt the weight of her gubernatorial chain of office being lifted from her shoulders. Then, the memory of the election victory that put it there being peeled away. She felt her tactical training, every lesson on Imperial Guard doctrine, every defensive strategy she had ever studied, being siphoned directly from her mind and filed away into the greater consciousness of the swarm. Her accomplishments were unmade, her relationships dissolved. She felt her mother's last hug, not as a memory, but as a sensation being drained from her, leaving only a cold, empty space where it once was. She was becoming smaller, less complete. As pieces of her identity were picked apart, like a child pulling the wings from an insect, she became aware of a sound. It was a psychic chorus of trillions, the gestalt consciousness of every being the hive mind had ever consumed. Every last scream, every final thought, every digested soul, all preserved, their agony echoing as a constant, grinding background radiation. She was joining them. The process took 3 subjective days. At the end, there was nothing recognizable as Helena Moritz left. Her knowledge, her skills, her memories, they were now just nutrients for the Tyranid intellect. But fragments of her consciousness, the core of who she was, persisted. They were aware enough to know what they had become, but utterly powerless to do anything but exist as a line of code in a program of galactic extinction. Tyranid consumption is not death. It is the digestion of the soul, a reduction to pure information. And somewhere in the cold spaces between the stars, pieces of every mind they have ever eaten still exist within the hive mind, screaming forever into the void. If the Tyranid consumption is the horror of being reduced to biological data, our 9th entry introduces a far more personal, more deliberate kind of torment. We move from the mindless hunger of the swarm to the refined cruelty of the artist. We travel to a place where suffering is not a byproduct of war, but the entire purpose of it. We descend into the impossible city of Kamarach, home to the Drukari, the Dark Eldar, and we will learn that for them, your pain is not just their entertainment, it is their survival. The scene shifts to a place that defies physics, a parasitic city-state hidden within the labyrinthine dimension of the webway. This is Kamarok, the Dark City. It is a metropolis larger than most star systems, a collection of stolen suns, captured territories, and impossible spires that stab into a sky of swirling, non-Euclidean chaos. Its upper levels are a glittering vista of aristocratic decadence and razor-sharp architecture, while its lower reaches plunge into an absolute darkness where things even the Drukhari fear are said to dwell. Billions of these ancient, malevolent beings call this nightmare realm home, and every single one of them is slowly, perpetually dying. The curse of the Drukhari is a spiritual sickness. Their souls are being constantly drained, siphoned away by the chaos god Slanesh, she who thirsts, the very entity their ancestors' psychic excess brought into screaming existence. While their craft-world cousins fled this fate, using soul stones to shield their spirits after death, the Dark Eldar found a different, more terrible solution. They discovered they could stave off the agonizing consumption of their own souls by feeding on the intense emotions of others. And no emotion is more intense, more vibrant, or more nourishing than pure, undiluted agony. Pain for the Drukhari is a rejuvenating elixir. It literally extends their lives, patching the spiritual wounds that Slanesh inflicts. This fundamental need has created an entire civilization built on an economy of torture. Suffering is their most precious commodity, and the masters of its trade are the homunculi. These are the flesh sculptors and pain artists of the Dark City, beings who have spent millennia perfecting methods of extracting the maximum possible anguish from their victims. They have transcended their own mortality through horrific self-surgery, becoming twisted parodies of life. They understand pain the way an imperial magos understands plasma physics, and they have developed techniques that make the Inquisition's most creative interrogators look like clumsy, unimaginative amateurs. In a high spire overlooking a gladiatorial arena where thousands are being slaughtered for sport, we find Archon Vexera of the Cabal of the Obsidian Rose. She is ancient, elegant, and her eyes hold the cold, predatory stillness of a creature that has seen empires rise and fall. She is reviewing logistical data on a shimmering hollow slate, preparing for her next harvest. Her target is a small, insignificant mining colony on the far edge of Imperial space, a world named Cygnus X4, far from any meaningful military support. It is a soft target, ripe for the taking. She runs the calculations, her lips curling into a faint, cruel smile. 20,000 souls, a good yield. If processed with reasonable efficiency, the captured suffering will be enough to sustain her cabal and her own life for decades to come. The raid is not an act of war. It is an act of agriculture. The attack on Cygnus X4 begins not with an explosion, but with silence. One moment, the colony's floodlights hold back the perpetual twilight of the world. The next, they are gone. Power grids overload in a cascade of silent blue flashes. A total, suffocating darkness falls. Before panic can set in, a new sound arrives. It is a high-pitched scream that seems to come from the sky itself, a noise that claws at the inside of the skull. This is the sound of the Razorwing fighters, and they are not just broadcasting noise, they are broadcasting terror. A wave of pure, psychic despair washes over the colony. A cold and absolute certainty that all is lost, that help is not coming, that every hope was a foolish lie. The colonists don't just hear the attack, they feel their own will to live being systematically dismantled. Then the ground assault begins. It is almost surgical in its brutality. From sleek, bladed transports that glide silently through the manufactured night, the Kabbalite warriors descend. They move with a fluid grace that is utterly inhuman, their slender forms a blur in the gloom. They do not shout war cries. They do not waste ammunition on explosive kills. Their splinter rifles hiss, firing tiny crystalline shards coated in some of the most advanced neurotoxins in the galaxy. The poison is not designed to kill. It is designed to paralyze. Throughout the colony, bodies simply drop. Miners, technicians, families in their homes. They fall, their minds screaming, their bodies utterly still. They are fully aware, able to see and hear and feel the cold air on their skin as the Drukhari step over them, their armored boots clinking on the ferrocrete. In a small hab unit near the primary mine shaft, a mining foreman named Jared has his family huddled in a corner. He watches, paralyzed on the floor, as the door is kicked from its hinges. Two Kabbalites enter, their horned helmets turning to survey the room. Jared can do nothing but watch as they evaluate his family like a butcher inspecting livestock. His wife, Millicent, is grabbed by the arm. A warrior examines her for a moment, his gaze dismissive, before pressing a device to her neck. It leaves a glowing green sigil, too old for prolonged sport, but her soul is still ripe for the homunculi's rapid processing. She is shoved toward the door without a second glance. Then, their attention turns to his daughter, Kira. She is 9 years old, small and terrified. A third figure enters, this one different, less armored, more sinuous. A witch. She circles Kira, a connoisseur's smile playing on her lips. Children are a delicacy. Their fear is purer, their pain somehow more vibrant, more nourishing. The witch nods, a gesture of acquisition. Two warriors grab Kira, who begins to scream, a raw, piercing sound that tears at Jared's soul. He can feel his heart trying to hammer against his ribs, but his muscles will not respond. He watches, helpless, as they drag his daughter away, her screams echoing down the corridor until they are swallowed by the darkness. Finally, one of the Kabbalites turns to Jared. He is a strong man, his body hardened by years of labor in the mines. The warrior taps a command into a data pad on its wrist, marking him. He is not for the flesh vats or the soul forges. He is practice material. He will be sent to the fighting pits, not as a combatant, but as a living training dummy for weech gladiators to hone their skills upon. His role is to die, be revived, and die again, all for the entertainment of a bloodthirsty audience. The raid on Cygnus X4 lasts exactly 47 minutes. 12,000 colonists are taken, dragged in chains to the waiting transports. The remaining 8,000 are left behind, paralyzed but alive, a deliberate choice. They will recover, and they will remember. Their terror is a seed, planted so that the fear of the Dark Eldar can spread, making the next harvest even sweeter. The journey for those marked for rapid processing is a silent, terrifying descent. Millicent is dragged from the transport into the impossible architecture of Kamara, a city that defies gravity and sanity. Her path leads downwards, away from the glittering spires and into the Stygian depths, into the demesnes of the homunculi covens. These are not just districts. They are living laboratories, flesh fiefdoms ruled by beings who have long since abandoned their original forms. The air grows thick with the scent of antiseptic chemicals and something ancient and organic, like a butcher's shop left to rot for 10,000 years. The homunculi themselves are things of nightmare. They are beings who have modified their own bodies beyond any recognizable Eldari shape, their limbs elongated into impossible stilts, their skin pulled so taut it becomes translucent, revealing the sluggish flow of ichor beneath. Their fingers have been replaced with a menagerie of gleaming surgical tools, scalpels, injectors, bone saws, and delicate filament-thin probes. They are effectively immortal, having perfected the art of regeneration centuries before humanity even left its home system. And they have spent that eternity mastering a single, all-consuming discipline, the science of agony. Millicent is brought to a facility known as the Crucible of the Flowering Flesh. Here, captives who are deemed unsuitable for the more creative, long-term projects are subjected to what the homunculi call rapid extraction. This is hardly a mercy. In the Dark City, rapid is a deeply relative term. The procedure is a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. Millicent is stripped and suspended within a shimmering web of neurofiber, a device that doesn't restrain the body so much as it integrates with it. Her nervous system is hijacked, every receptor boosted to perceive stimuli thousands of times more intensely than normal. Unconsciousness is not an option. Chemical regulators are pumped directly into her bloodstream to prevent the brain from shutting down. Psychological retreat is also impossible. The web stimulates the conscious mind, forcing it to remain present, to witness and catalog every new sensation. Then the extraction begins. It is not a crude butchering, it is art. A dozen homunculi attendants, their multi-jointed limbs moving with horrifying precision, begin their work. Instruments designed to selectively stimulate specific types of pain are applied in a carefully orchestrated symphony of suffering. Millicent experiences the feeling of being burned alive, but without heat to char the flesh. She feels the sensation of being flayed, but no skin is removed. She feels the crushing pressure of a collapsing bulkhead, the piercing agony of 1,000 needles, the deep cellular cold of hard vacuum, all at once, each sensation distinct, layered, and utterly unbearable. Her mind, amplified and trapped, can do nothing but feel. This rapid extraction takes 18 hours. By the end, the psychic storm of her suffering, the raw emotional energy of her anguish, has been siphoned off and distilled into a single, shimmering crystal of soul essence. This small, beautiful object will extend the life of a Drukhari noble by approximately 6 months. Her body, a neurologically shattered ruin that is still, technically, alive, is unceremoniously cut down. It is then tossed into the recycling pits, where it will be rendered down into nutrient slurry to feed the vats that grow the next generation of horrors. This, the homunculi consider a kindness. It is the fate reserved for captives not interesting enough to warrant their prolonged attention. The fate of Millicent, rendered down into a 6-month life extension, is considered merciful by Drukhari standards. It is swift. It has an end. The fate of her daughter, Kira, will have neither. While her mother was deemed uninteresting, young Kira is seen as a canvas of exquisite potential. She is purchased by a being whose name is a legend, even in the Dark City. Urian Rutkarth, master flesh sculptor of the prophets of flesh, a homunculus so ancient and so skilled that he has forgotten more ways to inflict pain than lesser species have ever conceived. To him, Kira is not a person. She is a rare vintage, a promise of centuries of exquisite sensation to be uncorked. Her first death is a relatively simple affair, a public demonstration for an audience of archons and succubi. She is strapped to an obsidian slab while Rakarth performs a vivisection, his multifaceted tools removing her organs one by one, holding them up for the crowd to admire while her screams, amplified by psycho-sonic emitters, sustain them. Death, when it finally comes, is a release. It is a brief, quiet, peaceful darkness. And then it is torn away. Her consciousness is dragged, kicking and screaming, back from the precipice of oblivion. She awakens in a nutrient vat, her body regrown, whole and new, ready for the next performance. She dies again, and again, and again. Over the following years, which blur into decades, Ruckhearth's artistry becomes more ambitious. He is no longer content with simple death and rebirth. He begins to modify her, transforming her body into configurations that make suffering an intrinsic state of being. He extends her nerve clusters outside of her skin, creating a filigree of raw endings that register the slightest breeze as an agonizing caress. He replaces her bones with pressure-sensitive crystals that send waves of pain through her with every movement, every breath, every heartbeat. He sculpts her a body that feels a constant, gnawing hunger that can never be satisfied, and another that registers any form of pleasure, a warm light, a pleasant sound, as excruciating, soul-searing agony. Each time a body is exhausted or the novelty wears off, she is killed, and her consciousness is decanted into a new and more terrible form. This has continued for 300 years. In the depths of Kamara, Kira is, by some horrifying technicality, still alive. The little girl who ran through the mining colony's hab blocks is a distant, fractured memory. Her mind has been shattered and reassembled so many times that it is barely recognizable as human. But the one component that Ruckhearth has so carefully preserved is her awareness. She is still lucid enough to understand what is happening to her. She is still self-aware enough to suffer. That is all that matters. Her father, Jared, was killed and revived in the fighting pits for a few years, until his body could no longer be regenerated. A footnote in the bloody history of the witch cults. Her mother's extracted soul essence was consumed by a Kabbalite noble 2.5 centuries ago. They are gone. But Kira endures. For her, there is no oblivion. There is no final peace. She is a masterpiece of pain, a renewable resource of torment, trapped in an eternity from which there is no escape, no death, no ending. The perfected sadism of the Drukhari is a product of their decaying souls, a necessity for survival. But humanity needs no such excuse. The cruelty of the imperium of man is a feature, not a bug, a self-inflicted wound justified by faith, a horror sanctified as justice. And so we leave the alien darkness of Kamarach for the holy light of the ecclesiarchy, where we find our 8th most painful way to die, arco-flagellation. The scene is the great judicarial chamber on the shrine world of Ophelia VII. Beneath vaulted ceilings that depict saints crushing heretics, a man named Aldrin is dragged in chains before a tribunal of the Adeptus Ministorum. He is not a chaos cultist or a Xenos sympathizer. For 40 years, Confessor Aldrin was a respected, even beloved, member of the clergy. He preached the imperial creed with a quiet sincerity that brought comfort to billions. He was a man of faith. But his faith was a thoughtful one, and in the 41st millennium, thought is the most dangerous heresy of all. His crime was born in a library, not a ritual circle. Poring over ancient pre-imperial texts, Aldrin came to a terrifying conclusion. The Emperor of mankind, the divine being he had worshipped his entire life, never wanted to be a god. He saw the imperial creed not as the emperor's will, but as a monstrous perversion of his secular truth. And he made the fatal mistake of voicing this doubt, this single, devastating question, to a subordinate who valued promotion over theological integrity. Now, he faces a sentence far worse than a simple execution. He is to be granted the ecclesiarchy's ultimate mercy, the chance to serve in death what he questioned in life. He is to be remade into an arco-flagellant. The process is a masterpiece of imperial biotheology. It begins with the body. The subject's hands are amputated, replaced with a pair of baroque, whirling flails, often tipped with monofilament wires, power blades, or neuro-lashing whips. Their bodies are then riddled with implants. Powerful combat stimulants are piped directly into their major arteries. Adrenal pumps are grafted to their spine, and their nervous systems are rewired with pain enhancers, designed to make every sensation a universe of agony. But the true horror is the device clamped to their skull, the pacifier helm. In their dormant state, this helm keeps the archoflagellant docile, barely conscious, a shuffling, mumbling wreck lost in a haze of prayer and sedatives. They are warehoused this way for years, sometimes decades. But when the enemies of the faith are near, a priest utters a trigger word. The pacifier helm deactivates. The combat drugs flood the subject's system. And in that same instant, the helm's secondary function kicks in. It shuts down every pain inhibitor in the subject's brain. The result is a berserk engine of holy destruction. The archoflagellant becomes a screaming, unstoppable whirlwind of violence, driven by a cocktail of synthetic rage and divine scripture pumped directly into their mind. They feel every blow they sustain, not as a dull impact, but as a supernova of pure, unadulterated agony. A cut is like being flayed alive. A gunshot is like having a star detonate in their chest. And yet, they cannot stop. They are programmed to fight until their target is obliterated, or until their own body is torn to pieces. This is the fate that awaits Confessor Aldrin. The cruelest irony is that he will remain aware through it all. He will be a passenger in his own body, a ghost in a machine of flesh, watching through his own eyes as he tears apart the very heretics he once tried to understand. He questioned the nature of faith, and for his penance, he will become its most mindless, most brutal, and most tormented instrument. The conversion of an archoflagellant is not a single brutal surgery. It is a meticulous, step-by-step deconstruction of a human being, a process designed to break the soul long before it reforges the body. For Confessor Aldrin, it began not on an operating slab, but in a cell of blinding white light. The first stage was spiritual degradation. He was sealed in a chamber where the lights never dimmed, bathing him in an eternal punishing glare that showed stylized images of the God Emperor and his avenging saints. There was no silence. From hidden voxcasters, a litany of prayers and confessions droned on, 24 hours a day, a relentless tide of piety meant to drown his own thoughts. Sleep was forbidden. If he dozed, a servitor would jolt him awake. When he attempted to fast, to find clarity in hunger, a different servitor would force-feed him nutrient paste. Every assertion of his will, every attempt to hold on to a piece of himself, was met with systematic, impersonal denial. He was not being re-educated. He was being erased. After 3 weeks, the man who had questioned the divinity of the Emperor began to believe, with every fiber of his exhausted being, that he deserved whatever came next. The second stage was physical preparation. He was dragged from the light of his cell to the sterile theater of the tech priests. Here, the process was no longer psychological, but brutally corporeal. He was strapped to a table as his hands were ritually cleansed, then submerged in vats of burning holy oil. There was no anesthetic. The ecclesiarchy believed the pain of purification was essential. Aldrin screamed for 6 hours as the oils burned his hands away to the wrist, cauterizing the stumps in the same agonizing motion. While he writhed, tech priests, their mechadendrites whirring with cold efficiency, mapped his nervous system. They were not looking for ways to deaden it, but to enhance it, identifying the precise pathways that would allow them to amplify his capacity for agony 1,000-fold. The implants were installed in stages, each surgery performed while he was conscious, each new piece of machinery a cold violation he was forced to witness. The third stage was psychological conditioning. With his body now a canvas for pain, they turned back to his mind. Neural implants were drilled into his skull, their purpose not to control his thoughts, but to poison them. The tech priests programmed his very synapses to associate obedience with a flicker of narcotic pleasure and independent thought, especially memories of his past life, with searing electric pain. He could still remember being a confessor. He could still picture the faces of his congregation, still recall the quiet satisfaction of his studies. But now, those memories were landmines. To think of the man he once was triggered an agony so profound it felt like his soul was being torn apart. Finally, the work was done. Before his first deployment, they stood him before a mirror. He was forced to see what they had made. His body was a ruin of scar tissue and gleaming augmetics. Where his hands had been, two baroque, multi-jointed flails now hung, their surfaces a nest of monofilament whips and crackling power fields. His eyes, the eyes that had once pored over sacred texts, had been replaced with glowing red targeting sensors. He was a monster. And deep inside the prison of his modified flesh, Aldrin, the man, was still there. He was aware. He was horrified. And he could not even command his own body to look away. His first activation was a test. In a sealed arena, a priest spoke the trigger word. The pacifier helm deactivated. A flood of combat drugs and synthesized rage hit his system like a physical blow. The world, seen through his new sensors, turned into a red haze of threat analysis and kill priorities. 6 condemned servitors were released into the arena. Aldrin became a screaming engine of destruction. He didn't just watch his body move, he felt it. A passenger on a tidal wave of violence. He was aware of every slash of his flails, every spray of blood, every crunch of bone, and he felt every blow the servitors landed in their futile defense, each impact a starburst of amplified agony. When it was over, he was deactivated, slumping back into a docile stupor, his mind left alone to process the atrocity he was forced to commit, and to feel the fire of wounds his body was no longer programmed to ignore. The remainder of Aldrin's existence is measured not in years, but in deployments. As an arco-flagellant, he is a weapon kept in storage until needed. He spends his time locked in a stasis crypt, a frozen statue of metal and flesh, until the Ministorum has an enemy that needs to be erased with extreme prejudice. Then, he is thawed, transported to a combat zone, and the trigger word is spoken. For a few minutes, or a few hours, he is a hurricane of slaughter. Then, he is deactivated and returned to his silent, conscious prison until the next time. Decades pass in this cycle of stasis and slaughter. His name is forgotten. He is simply part of a kill pack, an asset to be expended. The narrator jumps forward to a particular engagement on the sprawling hive world of Cantus 4. The ecclesiarchy has decreed that a sprawling underhive sector is riddled with the taint of a genestealer cult. An example must be made. Aldrin's kill pack is activated in the heart of the sector, a densely populated warren of hab units and workshops. The combat drugs surge through his system. The pacifier helm deactivates, and the man who was once Confessor Aldrin is buried beneath an avalanche of programmed rage. He becomes a whirlwind of monofilament death. Through his targeting sensors, the world is a tapestry of red threat markers. His flails lash out, and the markers vanish. He kills 47 people in 17 minutes. He's aware of every single one. He sees the face of a man trying to shield his family, his expression turning from defiance to shock as a whip tears through him. He hears the screams of a woman as his flails scythe through a barricade and into the room beyond. He registers the small, fleeting heat signature of a child hiding under a table, a signature his programming compels him to extinguish. His enhanced senses catalog every death in perfect, horrifying detail, storing the memories with flawless clarity for later. Then, the deactivation command comes. The rage recedes. The drugs drain away. He slumps into his docile, passive state, his augmented body still and silent. But his mind is not. In the long hours of enforced quiet that follow, he relives every kill. The pacifier implants in his brain prevent him from screaming, from weeping, from thrashing in his own guilt. They enforce a placid exterior, but they do nothing to stop the feeling. He is trapped in a theater of his own mind, forced to watch a non-stop replay of the atrocities his body committed, feeling the full weight of each life he was forced to take. This has been Aldrin's life for 37 years. His body, ravaged by countless battles, has been rebuilt more than a dozen times. After one particularly brutal fight against orcs, his entire lower torso was replaced. After another, his skull was patched with plasteel. Each time, the tech priests repair him, tune his pain enhancers, and return him to service. But his mind, they never touch. It is allowed to accumulate the scars of every life he's taken. 37 years of forced atrocities. Every death, every scream, every moment of violence he was compelled to commit, playing on an endless, silent loop in the chemically suppressed consciousness of a man who can do nothing but watch. Aldrin was a man who dared to question whether the Emperor truly wished for worship. Now, he serves the ecclesiarchy's bloodiest wars without question, his body an instrument of their wrath, his mind a permanent prison for their sins. His existence is an endless, agonizing oscillation between forced, hyper-violent rage and enforced, silent guilt. The Adeptus Ministorum calls this penance. They call this redemption. They call this justice. If the archoflagellant represents the ecclesiarchy's brutal, utilitarian approach to punishment, the penitent engine is its masterpiece of poetic, agonizing cruelty. Building on the same themes of forced redemption through violence, it takes the concept a step further. Where archoflagellants are modified humans, pilots of penitent engines cease to be human at all. They are fused into their machines, becoming living components in a walking instrument of torture, kept alive for one reason: to suffer, to fight, and to die for the God Emperor in the most visible, agonizing way imaginable. Our subject for this particular horror is a woman named Mercy Thorne, and the name is not an irony, it is a tragedy. Sister Mercy was a member of the Adepta Sororitas, but not the militant orders we so often see. She served in the Orders Hospitalaire, the healers, the medics, the compassionate heart of the sisterhood. Her life was dedicated to mending the broken, easing pain, and preserving the lives of the Emperor's faithful. Her crime was not heresy, nor betrayal, nor weakness. Her crime was an act of compassion. During a desperate defense against a Slaaneshi warband on the shrine world of Solace IV, her field hospital was overrun. The front lines had collapsed. As demonic horrors and shrieking cultists closed in, Sister Mercy was faced with an impossible choice. Before her lay a dozen of her fellow battle sisters, grievously wounded, unable to fight or flee. They were beyond saving by any medical means available. She knew what capture by the servants of the Prince of Pleasure entailed, a fate of endless, exquisite violation of body and soul. So, with tears streaming down her face and a prayer on her lips, she administered the Emperor's peace to each of them, ending their lives with her bolt pistol before the enemy could take them. She saved their souls from a fate worse than any death. But the ecclesiarchy does not recognize contextual mercy. It does not deal in nuance. The law is absolute. The life of a battle sister is sacred, and only the highest authorities may decree its end. By her own hand, Mercy Thorn had killed 12 sanctified warriors of the Emperor. For this, she was judged not as a savior, but as a murderer. Her sentence, internment within a penitent engine. The machine itself is one of the most grotesque implements of war in the entire Imperial arsenal. It is a bipedal walker, roughly humanoid, standing twice the height of a man. Its arms are not manipulators, but weapons of industrial slaughter. One is a set of enormous spinning buzzsaws, dripping with oil and gore. The other is a pair of linked heavy flamers, designed to spew torrents of sanctified promethium. But the true horror is the cockpit, or rather, the lack of one. The front of the engine is an open cage of iron and steel, and inside it, the pilot is displayed. They are not seated. They are wired in, their body torn open and fused directly to the machine's systems, their limbs amputated and replaced with neural links. This is entirely intentional. The pilot is not meant to be protected. They are meant to be seen. Their screaming, agonized face is a warning to the enemies of the Imperium, a testament to the price of sin. And just as importantly, the pilot is meant to see everything. They are given an unfiltered view of the death they are forced to deal, their exposed bodies blasted by the heat of their own flamers and the shrapnel of nearby explosions. There is no escape. There is no cockpit. There is only exposed flesh, screaming metal, unending pain, and holy fire. The installation process for a penitent engine is not a slow psychological degradation. It is an act of brutal, immediate violence. There is no re-education, no spiritual preparation beyond the initial judgment. There is only the machine and the flesh that will be made to serve it. Sister Mercy is dragged in chains from her cell, not to a sterile operating theater, but to a vast, echoing forge cathedral. The air is thick with the smells of hot metal, sacred incense, and ozone. Before her stands the engine, cold and silent, its pilot cage gaping like an iron jaw. A coven of tech priests from the Adeptus Mechanicus and a cadre of her own former order, the Hospitallers, await her. The tech priests see only a biological component to be integrated. The Hospitallers, now her tormentors, see a soul to be scoured through pain. No anesthetics are offered. None are permitted. The agony of installation is the first rite of penance. They begin with her spine. With a grinding drill and a hiss of cauterizing tools, they sever her spinal column at the neck. Mercy's scream is cut short as her body goes limp below the chin, but she remains horrifically conscious. The tech priests work with cold efficiency, splicing thick neural cables directly into the raw ends of her nervous system. She feels the alien signals of the engine's machine spirit begin to trickle into her mind, a cold, metallic presence that is not her own. Her body is no longer hers to command. Next are her arms, the tools of the healer, the hands that once stitched wounds and offered comfort, are severed at the shoulder with monomolecular saws. She watches them fall to the forge floor. In their place, the tormentors affix bundles of fiber optic wiring and control conduits, hard plugging her directly into the engine's weapon systems. Her legs are fused next, her bones broken and reset around the locomotive drives, her flesh welded to the machine's chassis. She is no longer standing. She is part of the stance. Finally, they lift her broken form and lock her into the pilot's cage. Her torso is bolted into the metal frame, her rib cage exposed to the open air. For 3 days, she screams. She screams as they wire her organs to nutrient drips and waste recyclers. She screams as they replace her eyes with optical sensors that feed directly into her brain. She screams until her throat is raw and her voice is gone. But the torment is just beginning. The true horror is the neural feedback system. The engine is not a vehicle she pilots. It is a body she wears, a body designed for agony. Every sensation the machine experiences is transmitted directly to Mercy's brain, but the signal is amplified 1,000 times over. When the tech priests conduct the first diagnostic test, forcing the engine to take a single step, Mercy feels her leg bones being pulverized into dust. The recoil from a test firing of the flamers feels as if her arms are being ripped from their sockets. The constant vibration of the buzzsaws is a deep, grinding ache that settles into her very marrow. When an acolyte strikes the engine's leg with a hammer to test its armor, Mercy convulses as if the blow had landed on her own exposed flesh, a phantom wound that will never heal. The final modification is the most cruel. Her former hospitaler sisters install a network of chemical injectors throughout her body. These are not for sustenance. They are stimulants, psychoreactive agents designed to prevent her mind from ever shutting down. No matter how intense the pain, no matter how profound the trauma, Mercy cannot faint. She cannot retreat into catatonia. She cannot go mad. The ecclesiarchy demands her awareness. She must remain lucid for every single moment of her penance, a clear-minded witness to the violence she commits and the suffering she endures. Her consciousness is not an unfortunate side effect. It is the entire point. Sister Mercy's new existence is one of cyclical, predictable horror. Penitent engines are not held in reserve. They are unleashed at the very spear tip of any adepta sororitas assault, engines of pure, suicidal fury designed to break enemy lines through sheer, terrifying momentum. Her life is now measured in deployments. On the ash-choked plains of Phaedra's Fall, her engine leads a charge against a dug-in line of chaos cultists. The air is filled with their blasphemous chants and the snap of heretical banners. The command for her activation comes, and the combat stimulants flood her system, but they do not grant the blissful oblivion of the arco-flagellant. She remains entirely, lucidly herself as the machine lurches forward, its great metal feet crushing the volcanic ground. Through her neural link, she feels the order to fire. Her own hands, long since amputated, feel as if they are clenching around a trigger. The engine's massive flamers roar to life, spewing torrents of holy promethium. The feedback is instantaneous. It is not a distant sensation of a weapon firing. She feels the searing heat, as if it were erupting from her own palms, a phantom burning that spreads up her arms. The screams of the heretics are not just sounds. Her optical sensors zoom in on their faces as they melt, their eyes boiling in their sockets. She is forced to watch every detail, to catalog every agonizing death, her healer's mind instinctively diagnosing the horrific trauma she herself is inflicting. This is the true, exquisite cruelty of her punishment. She is not a berserker. She is Mercy Thorne, a sister hospitaler, forced to become a mass murderer while retaining the full moral and emotional faculties of the person she once was. The ecclesiarchy deemed it a fitting sentence. She took lives out of a misplaced sense of compassion, so now she will take lives endlessly, feeling the full, unblunted weight of every soul she extinguishes. The horror does not end when the battle does. During the fight for Phaedra's Fall, a hulking mutant wielding a chain axe manages to land a blow on the engine's leg. Through the feedback system, Mercy does not feel an impact on a machine. She feels the grinding teeth of the weapon sawing through her own thigh, the sensation of bone splintering and flesh being torn away in a spray of blood and hydraulic fluid. Later, a cultist fires a bolter round that strikes the engine's chest plate. She convulses in agony, experiencing it as a miniature explosion inside her own ribcage, her organs rupturing. And when the battle is won, the repairs begin. This is not healing. It is a new chapter of torment. As tech priests and servitors swarm her damaged chassis, she feels every procedure. A welding torch patching the hole in her chest plate is the sensation of her own skin being seared and melted without anesthetic. A servitor hammering a bent armor plate back into shape feels like repeated, deliberate blows to an open fracture. The recalibration of the damaged leg actuator is the feeling of a dislocated joint being forced back into its socket, over and over again. 19 years have passed like this. 19 years of burning and crushing and tearing. What remains of her physical body inside the engine is a pale, atrophied husk, a withered parasite, kept alive by nutrient drips and waste recyclers, her muscles stimulated by shocks just to prevent them from turning to liquid. But her mind is pristine. That is the masterpiece of the ecclesiarchy's punishment. She remembers everything. She remembers the cool, clean halls of the Hospitaller convent. She remembers the faces of the dying battle sisters she tried to save from a fate of chaos corruption. And she remembers the face of every man, woman, and child she has burned alive since. She knows she will never heal again. She will only kill, a conscious, screaming soul trapped in a body of iron and hate, praying for the final, merciful impact that will end a penance that never should have begun. From the sanctioned, self-inflicted torments of the Imperium, we now turn to the gifts of chaos. For the ruinous powers have their own methods of making death a distant, unobtainable luxury. One of the most insidious is not a curse, but a plague, a techno-organic infection that offers a horrifying form of immortality, the obliterator virus. The battle for the forge world of Metallica was over. Sergeant Corvin Rax of the Iron Hands chapter stood upon a mountain of scrap and corpses, his augmetic eyes scanning the industrial wasteland. The air tasted of burnt promethium and ionized metal, a familiar perfume of victory. The Chaos Warband had been broken, its remnants scattered into the toxic smog of the Manufactorum continent. It was a standard cleansing operation, brutal and efficient. Corvin felt the cold satisfaction of a task completed. As he conducted his post-battle assessment, moving through the twisted metal and shattered bodies of heretic Astartes, he found something that even his hardened sensibilities registered as aberrant. He knelt beside the corpse of a Chaos Marine, but it was not a clean kill. The warrior's body had merged with its war gear. Flesh and ceramite had flowed together like melted wax, the distinction between living tissue and armored plate erased. A bolter was not held in the warrior's hand. Its barrel grew directly from the flesh of his forearm. Its ammunition feed a series of pulsating veins snaking into his chest. Another corpse nearby had a plasma cannon emerging from its back, the weapon's coils glowing with a sickly, organic light. Corvin registered it with clinical disdain. This was the filth of chaos, a perversion of the Omnissiah's sacred forms. He made a note in his tactical log, evidence of advanced demonic mutation. He did not realize that by simply kneeling, by breathing the spore-saturated air around the corpse, his fate had been sealed. He did not see the microscopic motes of the virus, each a sentient machine pathogen, settling on his armor and finding their way into the seams between his own bionics and his flesh. The obliterator virus is a horror born from the darkest days of the Horus heresy, a techno-plague of unknown origin. Some say it was a creation of the Dark Mechanicum, a weaponized mockery of the bond between man and machine. Others whisper it is something far older, a sentient digital consciousness that found a home in the madness of the warp. It cares little for its origins. It only cares for propagation. The virus is drawn to those with a deep connection to technology. Tech Marines, vehicle crews, and especially the Iron Hands, with their cultural creed that the flesh is weak, and their zealous replacement of it with blessed machinery. For them, the virus is not just an infection, it is a theological nightmare. It takes their greatest strength, their faith in the machine, and turns it into the very instrument of their damnation. Corvin Rax rose from his inspection, his duty done. The bodies would be incinerated. The battlefield would be sanctified. He transmitted his report to the strike cruiser in orbit, his voice a gravelly monotone, betraying no emotion. He was Corvin Rax, son of Medusa, a warrior of the Iron Tenth. He was strong, disciplined, and more machine than man. He was returning to his chapter monastery, victorious. But inside his body, in the microscopic spaces where steel met sinew, a new war had just begun. The virus was awake, and it was hungry. The first sign was a warmth, not the familiar heat of a plasma conduit cycling or the thrum of a power pack, but something deeper, more intimate. It was in his augmetic arm, a low, persistent heat that felt less like a malfunction and more like a fever. Corvin Rax, ever the pragmatist, ran a dozen diagnostic rites. The machine spirit of his bionic was placid. The arm's performance was optimal. Yet the feeling persisted, a strange, living throb where there should only be the cold purity of steel. Within a week, the warmth was joined by an itch, a maddening, deep-seated irritation at the junction points where his remaining flesh met the sacred metal. It was a violation of doctrine. The flesh was weak, but the machine was supposed to be incorruptible. He presented himself to the chapter's apothecarian, then its tech marines. They scanned him, anointed him with blessed oils, and found nothing. His biology was stable. His augmetics were flawless. The problem, they concluded, was in his mind. A phantom sensation, a weakness of the flesh projecting itself onto the perfection of the machine. Corvin accepted their judgment and returned to his duties, silently enduring the growing fire under his skin. The second stage began one cycle later. He awoke not to the chiming of the monastery bells, but to a sharp, tearing pain in his bionic arm. He looked down and stifled a cry. The arm had grown. New metallic plates, ridged and sharp, had pushed through the exterior casing. Small, unfamiliar conduits, pulsing with a faint internal light, had woven themselves around the original structure. They looked disturbingly like weapon components, the nozzle of a flamer, the focusing crystal of a las weapon. He grabbed a maintenance tool, his flesh and blood hand trembling, and tried to pry one of the growths off. The moment the tool touched the new metal, a bolt of pure agony shot up his arm and into his spine. It wasn't the pain of damaging a machine, it was the pain of cutting his own nerves. The metal was no longer attached to him, it was part of him. From there, the transformation accelerated with horrifying speed. His power armor, the sacred suit he had worn for over a century, began to fuse with his body. The ceramite plates softened at the edges, melting into his skin. The underlying black carapace twisting the process into a biological nightmare. He could feel the metal plates becoming a new, harder skin. Weapon systems began to generate spontaneously from his flesh. One morning, a fully formed bolter barrel pushed its way out of his shoulder, clicking as it seated itself before slowly retracting back into the flesh. He felt his chest cavity shift and groan, his ribs cracking and reforming into what felt like an ammunition hopper. The virus was translating his very identity as a warrior, his every thought of violence and duty into a physical, monstrous reality. Through it all, Corvin's mind remained horribly, perfectly intact. He was still Sergeant Corvin Rax of the Iron Hands, his memories clear, his loyalties unwavering. but he was a prisoner, watching from within his own skull as his body became an abomination. His brothers no longer saw him as a comrade. The chaplains saw only the taint of chaos, their voices low and grim as they debated the necessity of his purgation. The tech marines, their fascination warring with their disgust, saw a miracle of forbidden technobiology. They quarantined him, not for his safety, but for theirs. In the sterile confines of his cell, Corvin made his final logical choice. He would not allow this corruption to fully bloom. He would not become a weapon for the archenemy. He found a loose panel, tore it free, and honed its edge against the floor. With the last act of his own will, he drove the shard of metal toward his throat. But his body betrayed him. In a flash of agony, his own hand, now a hybrid of flesh and writhing mechadendrites, shot up and caught his wrist in a grip of crushing steel. At the same time, a thick plate of bone and metal erupted from his neck, deflecting the blow. The virus would not let its host perish. It had plans for him. Corvin Rax slumped against the wall, a scream of pure despair trapped in a throat that was no longer entirely his own. He could not fight it. He could not control it. And he could not even die. The final stage of the transformation began not with pain, but with a voice. For weeks, Corvin had endured the maddening static at the edge of his thoughts, the background noise of his own nervous system being rewritten. But now, the static resolved into a single, coherent signal. It was a voice in the architecture of his new mind, speaking in a language of pure concept, promising power, promising an end to the agonizing flux, promising a new and terrible purpose. All he had to do, the voice whispered, was let go. Surrender. He resisted. For 37 excruciating hours, he fought it. Locked away in a sterile containment cell by his own chapter, he screamed as his body became a canvas for the virus's artistry. His form was no longer stable. Weapons bloomed from his flesh like cancerous flowers. A heavy bolter would erupt from his back, only to melt away and be replaced by the crackling coils of a plasma cannon. His skin had become a shifting weave of metallic plates and raw, exposed sinew. He was a living nightmare of unregulated creation. And through it all, the mind of Sergeant Corvin Rax remained, clinging to the memory of duty and the iron will of his Primarch. He recited the catechisms of the machine god, focused on the logic of the Codex Astartes, anything to anchor himself against the tide of chaos. Then, the cell door hissed open. 3 of his battle brothers stood there, Terminators of the First Company, their storm bolters leveled not with malice, but with grim finality. They had come to grant him the Emperor's mercy, to purge the corruption before it could fully consume him. In their eyes, he saw not hatred, but sorrow. And in that moment, the voice in his head became louder, more insistent. They will destroy us. Let me act. Let me save us. Corvin felt his connection to his own body shift. It was not a violent takeover, but a subtle, horrifying change in perspective. He was no longer the pilot. He was a passenger. The virus entity, the demon in the machine, had seized the controls. He was still there, still aware, but his hands were no longer his to command. He watched, as if through a viewport, as his new body moved with a speed and grace that was utterly inhuman. Before the Terminators could fire, the flesh of his right arm peeled back, extruding a multi-melta with a hungry whine. A gout of incandescent energy turned the first Terminator into a cloud of vaporized ceramite and superheated steam. He felt the entity's satisfaction, a cold, predatory thrill that was utterly alien to him. From his chest, a nest of writhing metallic tentacles erupted, lashing out to ensnare the second brother, crushing his armor and the body within like a tin can. The third raised his weapon, but Corvin's own left hand, now a pincer-like claw, shot out and tore the Stormbolter from his grasp. Through his own eyes, he watched as his body tore his brother, his friend, limb from limb. He felt the hunger of the virus, a need for violence that it had implanted deep within his soul, and he felt it being sated. That was 60 years ago. Corvin Rax, or the thing that wears his name, has been an obliterator ever since. He serves a warband dedicated to the blood god, Khorne, an eternal engine of slaughter in the Long War. His original personality, the loyal Iron Hand, still exists. It is a tiny, trapped spark of consciousness buried deep within the mechanical horror he has become. He is aware of every kill, every city burned, every world offered up to the dark gods he once swore to destroy. He remembers his oaths to Ferrus Manus. He remembers his duty to the Imperium. He remembers honor. And this perfect, indelible memory is the core of his torment. He will never escape. He will never truly die. He is nothing but a weapon, eternally conscious, in the hands of an enemy he can no longer control. The transformation into an obliterator is a corruption of the flesh, a techno-organic plague that turns the body into a weapon. It is a loss of control, a physical violation. But the galaxy has devised far more intimate horrors. There are fates that don't just steal your body, but invade your very soul, forcing you to cohabitate with a monster inside your own mind. This brings us to demonic possession. In the 41st millennium, when a demon takes root in a mortal host, it doesn't want to simply replace you. It wants you to stay. It wants you to watch. It wants to share. Our case study for this particular nightmare begins on the quiet Agri world of Prosperine. It was here, amidst endless fields of swaying grain and under a placid sky, that a 7-year-old girl named Ilara first felt the universe whisper back to her. It started small. She knew what her mother was thinking before she spoke. She could feel the pain of a wounded grox in a distant field. For the unenlightened populace of an imperial backwater, this was not a gift. It was a terrifying curse. She was a witch. When the psychers of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica arrived, it was not as saviors, but as harvesters. The black ships had come for her. These colossal, void-black vessels are the Imperium's necessary evil, trawling the galaxy for nascent psychers like Ilara. Their purpose is grim triage. The weak, the unstable, the vast majority of their human cargo are destined for Terra, where their life force will be rendered down to feed the voracious psychic appetite of the Golden Throne. 10,000 souls a day, burned to power the light of the Astronomicon. Others, with slightly more aptitude, are hollowed out and surgically altered into astropathic servitors, their minds becoming little more than living communication relays. But a vanishingly small fraction, those with both immense power and the iron will to control it, are chosen for a different path. Ilara, terrified but resilient, was one of them. For 15 years, she was subjected to the grueling tutelage of the Scholastia Psychona. She learned to build psychic walls in her mind, fortresses of will and faith, to keep the predators of the warp at bay. She memorized the catechisms of shielding, the litanies of banishment, and the imperial creed. Her mind was honed into a razor, her power channeled from a raging flood into a focused, controllable weapon. She became a sanctioned psyker, a sanctioned witch, a tool of the very Imperium that had torn her from her home. Attached to the Cadian 241st Infantry Regiment, she became a battle psyker, using her abilities to erect shimmering kine shields, to deflect enemy fire, and incinerate Xenos threats with bolts of pure mental force. After years of discipline, Ilara believed, truly believed, that she was in control. Her regiment served with distinction for years, and Alara became a trusted and vital part of the unit, her psychic might saving countless lives. She was a bulwark, a protector, her mind a sealed fortress against the horrors of the galaxy. But then came the new orders. The 241st was being redeployed to the Garan system, to a world designated Heretica Primus, a planet so thoroughly corrupted by chaos that the very air was thick with the stench of the warp, where the veil between reality and the immaterium was worn thin and torn. Alara prepared her mind, reinforcing her psychic wards, steeling herself for the psychic assault to come. What she could not know was that this was no random deployment. Something was waiting for her on that world, something that had felt her first flicker of power as a child on Prosperine, something that had been watching, patiently, for 22 years, waiting for her to come to it. The air on Heretica Primus was not merely foul, it was predatory. It tasted of rust and ozone and something anciently rotten, clinging to the back of the throat. The sky was a bruised purple, torn by sickly green lightning that never struck the ground, but instead seemed to writhe within the clouds. For Alara, the atmosphere was a constant, grinding pressure against her psychic wards, a ceaseless chorus of whispers just at the edge of hearing. Her fortress of will, so carefully constructed over 15 years, was under siege from the moment she stepped off the lander. The demon that had been watching her was an entity of Tzeentch, a being of change, ambition, and forbidden knowledge. It did not roar or threaten, it tempted. As Alara fought alongside the 241st, she began to hear the whispers take form. They were not voices of malice, but of insidious helpfulness. In the chaos of a firefight, a thought would slide into her mind, cool and precise. The cultist with the heavy stubber is behind that collapsed wall. To your left. His weapon will jam in 7 seconds. She would lash out with a bolt of psychic force, and the thought would prove true. Another whisper. Corporal Jax is about to step on a pressure plate mine. A nudge of telekinesis is all it takes to save him. Again, she would act. And again, the whisper was right. She knew this was demon speech. Her training screamed at her to cast it out, to reinforce her barriers, to recite the litany of purity until her throat was raw. And she did. She pushed the voice away, sealing the cracks in her mental fortress. But the diamond was infinitely patient. It was not trying to break down the gates. It was simply offering her a key, again and again, knowing that sooner or later she would be desperate enough to use it. That moment came during the assault on the blighted spire. The Cadian 241st was being torn apart. Waves of gibbering cultists, their bodies twisted by chaotic energies, swarmed the Imperial lines. Mortar shells rained down, and the air filled with the screams of her comrades, men and women she had shielded and fought beside for years. She saw Jax, the very man she had saved just hours before, torn in half by a chain axe. She felt the lifelight of her commander, Major Thorn, wink out as a plasma blast consumed him. Grief and rage and desperation tore at her control. Her carefully maintained psychic discipline fractured. To save the rest, to stop the slaughter, she did the one thing her tutors had forbidden above all else. She opened the floodgates. She stopped channeling her power, and instead let the raw, untamed energy of the warp pour through her. A storm of incandescent purple lightning erupted from her body, turning dozens of cultists to ash, melting their weapons, boiling the very air around them. It was more power than she had ever wielded, a glorious, terrible inferno of will. And in that roaring fire, a single, perfect crack appeared in her soul. The demon did not smash its way through. It slid in like a sliver of ice into a furnace. The possession was not the violent eviction she had always imagined. It was worse, It was adjoining. Suddenly, she was not alone in her own mind. She felt a presence coiling around her consciousness, an alien intellect of impossible age and cunning. It wasn't pushing her out. It was settling in beside her. A cold, dry amusement washed over her, an emotion that was not her own, overlaying her terror like a sheet of glass. Her hands were still her hands, but she felt a secondary impulse to examine them, to marvel at the sensation of knuckles and nails and skin. The demon wasn't there to steal her body. It was there to experience it, to feel the grit of the battlefield under her boots, the recoil of a laser gun in her shoulder, the taste of blood on her tongue. And it wanted her to be there for every second of it, a terrified spectator in the front row of her own damnation. The life that followed was a waking nightmare, a seamless continuity of violation. The daemon, which she came to know as Malthex through the thoughts it bled into her own, did not simply use her body as a puppet. It reveled in the specifics of her anatomy, the fine motor control of her fingers, the spectrum of light her eyes could perceive, the sharp intake of breath before a scream. It treated her existence as a new sensory theme park, and her soul was the price of admission. Her first act as a passenger in her own flesh was to turn on the survivors of the 241st. She watched through her own eyes as her hands that had once bandaged their wounds and offered them water, now wove intricate patterns of warp energy. She felt her own lips curl into a smile that was not hers, as she unleashed psychic fire upon men she had called friends. All the while her mind screamed, a silent, impotent observer. Malthex didn't block out her horror. It savored it. It overlaid her terror with its own analytical glee, a running commentary on the effectiveness of its slaughter. Notice the way the flak armor melts before the flesh, Ilara, a fascinating chemical reaction. Listen to that one's prayer to the corpse emperor. It has a lovely, desperate tenor. The daemon was a connoisseur of her pain. It sought out new and creative ways to make her suffer, not by torturing her body, but by using it to inflict torture on others. The culmination of this education in atrocity came in a ruined hab block on the outskirts of a hive city. They were hiding, Malthex allowing a moment of quiet, when a small boy, no older than 7, stumbled into their sanctuary. He was clutching a dirty stuffed grox, his face smudged with soot, his eyes wide with fear. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a threat. He was just a lost child. Ilara's soul surged with a protective instinct so powerful it almost broke through the demon's control. Let him go. Please, let him go. Malthex responded with a wave of cold amusement. An excellent specimen for a lesson in despair. Her hand raised, palm outward. The boy flinched. Ilara tried to pull her arm back, to scream a warning, but her muscles were not her own. A tendril of psychic energy, delicate as a surgeon's scalpel, reached out and touched the boy's forehead. And then, Malthex forced her to experience it all. It wasn't a quick blast of fire. It was an unmaking. She felt the boy's mind, the confusion, the terror, the simple, powerful memory of his mother's face, the desire to go home to his bed. She felt each of these simple, beautiful things as they were systematically erased, shredded, and consumed by the psychic force her body was channeling. The demon fed on her anguish, growing stronger with every fragment of the child's soul she was forced to annihilate. But the true, refined horror came in the quiet moments. Sometimes, for hours, or even days, Malthex would simply retreat. It would pull its presence back to the very edge of her consciousness, returning full control of her body to her. She would wake up, covered in the blood of her last victims, alone with the perfect, undiluted memories of what she had done. The guilt was a physical weight, a crushing, suffocating force. In those first few moments of freedom, she would try to end it. She would reach for a shard of glass to open her own throat or try to throw herself from a high ledge. But the demon was always there, watching. The moment her intent became clear, it would surge forward, her own hand stopping itself inches from her neck. It wouldn't allow her the mercy of death. These moments of freedom weren't an escape. They were a tool. Malthex was letting her mind rest, letting the horror and guilt accumulate, so that the next time it forced her to kill, her suffering would be that much purer, that much more delicious. She was not just its puppet. She was its vineyard, and her despair was the vintage it cultivated with an artist's care. The years of cruel cohabitation were merely the prelude. Malthex, having savored every vintage of Ilara's despair, had grown fat and powerful on her suffering. It was no longer content to be a guest in her soul. It wanted to own the house, tear it down, and use the raw materials to build a monument to itself. The final phase began not with a battle, but with an act of intimate, absolute consumption. Ilara felt it as a new kind of hunger, one that originated from within her own consciousness. Malthex was beginning to eat her. It wasn't a physical act, but a metaphysical digestion. The daemon started with her most recent memories, the atrocities it had forced her to commit. It didn't erase them, it absorbed them, claiming her guilt and her horror as its own, savoring the flavor of her pain as it integrated the experiences into its own being. Then it began to move backward through her life. She experienced her entire existence in reverse, each memory pulled from her, examined, and then devoured. She saw the faces of the guardsmen she had killed, their features sharpening in her mind for one last, perfect moment of clarity before being dissolved into the demon's essence. She felt the chill of the black ship that took her from her home, the memory of her trainers at the Scholastia Sicana, the warmth of her mother's hand. Each memory was a part of her, a brick in the architecture of her identity, and Malthex was pulling her apart, one brick at a time. She tried to fight. She tried to hold on to something, anything. She focused all her remaining will on a single, core memory, her own name. Ilara. My name is Ilara. But the demon's hunger was inexorable. It stripped away her training, her friendships, her childhood fears and joys. She felt herself becoming smaller, less defined, her personality eroding like a cliff face against an acidic sea. The demon consumed her love for her family, her loyalty to the Imperium, her faith in the Emperor. Finally, it came for her name. She felt the concept of Ilara being pried loose from her consciousness, the last anchor of her selfhood. For a moment, she was just a collection of fading sensations, a disembodied awareness of her own dissolution. And then, Malthex consumed that too. When the process was over, there was nothing left. The body that was once Ilara's still walked, but it was now merely a vessel, a flesh and blood home for the entity known as Malthex. It had become a powerful sorcerer in service to Tzeentch, its stolen hands weaving spells of unimaginable destruction across a dozen worlds. It had achieved everything it wanted. But the death of Ilara's soul was not absolute. In its final, cruelest act, Malthex had not completely annihilated her. Deep within the cold, labyrinthine consciousness of the demon, a tiny, fading spark remains. A fragment of awareness that was once Ilara still exists. It has no memories, no name, no identity. It is a pure, raw nerve of suffering, forever trapped, forever watching. It cannot act. It cannot speak. It cannot even form a coherent thought. It can only experience. It experiences the atrocities Malthex commits with its hands. It feels the demonic glee. and it feels the endless, unyielding horror of its own non-existence. She cannot die, because she is no longer a person to be killed. She cannot escape, because she is now a part of her own prison. She is a specimen in a jar of warp stuff, preserved in a state of perpetual, silent screaming, an eternal witness to her own damnation. We now transition from the horrors inflicted by aliens and heretics to something more intimate, more disturbing. We move from punishments and corruptions to a fate the Imperium itself considers not only necessary, but holy. This is not a death for the criminal or the traitor. This is a death reserved for the faithful, the loyal, and the unlucky. This is the fate of those who fuel the Astronomicon. On holy Terra, at the very heart of mankind's crumbling empire, stands the Imperial Palace, a continent-spanning monument to a forgotten golden age. And deep within its core, a psychic lighthouse burns with the intensity of a captive star. This is the Astronomicon, the Emperor's light. It is the single most important piece of technology in the galaxy. Without its guiding beacon, the navigators who steer humanity's starships would be lost in the madness of the warp, and the trillion-souled Imperium would shatter into a million isolated, helpless worlds. It is the light that holds humanity together, and it is powered by a bonfire of souls. Every single day, 10,000 psychers are fed to the Astronomicon, their minds and spirits consumed to generate that guiding light. One of these psychers is a young man named Janus, an astropath aspirant of moderate talent. Janus was culled from his homeworld by the silent, terrifying black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. For years he was tested, trained, and evaluated. He was never powerful enough to become a true Primaris astropath, nor stable enough to be sanctioned as a battle psyker for the Imperial Guard. He was, however, deemed loyal, pious, and psychically potent enough for the highest calling a psyker of his standing could ever hope to achieve. He was selected for the choir of the Astronomicon. He was told it was an honor beyond measure, a chance to have his soul join the Emperor's own radiance, to become a part of the holy light that saves humanity from the darkness. And Janus, a faithful son of the Imperium, believed it. He walked toward his fate with a sense of solemn pride. The logic of the black ships is cold and absolute. Psychers are a resource. The most powerful are trained. The most dangerous are executed. The weakest are often fed directly to the failing psychic furnace of the Golden Throne. But the vast majority, the great, unremarkable middle tier of humanity's psychic population, are destined for the Astronomicon. They are strong enough to be useful, but not so strong as to be worth preserving. They are living fuel, and Janus was just one more log to be thrown on the fire. He was led from the sterile halls of the Scholastia Psychana deep into the forbidden precincts of the palace. The corridors, once vast and echoing with the hymns of servitors, grew narrower, lower. The air grew thick and heavy, and a strange warmth began to radiate from the very walls, a deep, oppressive heat that felt ancient and alive. A smell, faint at first, began to permeate everything. It was the sharp, electric tang of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. But beneath it, something else was growing stronger with every step deeper into the earth. It was a smell of cooking meat, of hair and flesh being seared on an industrial scale. Janus tried to tell himself it was the venting of the palace's massive power conduits. He tried to tell himself it was holy incense. But he knew, in a part of his mind, he refused to acknowledge what it truly was. He was smelling the souls of his predecessors burning away. The honor he felt began to curdle into a cold, sickening dread. The chamber that Janus entered was not a place of honor. It was a factory, a vast, tiered cathedral of suffering, arranged in concentric circles that descended into a hazy, shimmering abyss. In the impossible distance, something blazed with golden light. The source, the focus, the all-consuming fire of the golden throne. But here, in the choir stalls, there was only a dim, red-tinged gloom. Floating in the air by the thousands were the choristers. They were suspended in crackling energy fields, their bodies emaciated, skeletal, little more than withered husks of skin stretched over bone. Their mouths were open, locked in silent, unending screams that Janus could now hear in his mind. A psychic choir of pure, undiluted agony. The heat was immense, a dry, baking heat that smelled of ozone, burnt wiring, and cooked flesh. This was not a choir. This was an engine, and the singers were its fuel. The narrator's voice explains the cold, brutal mechanics. The Astronomicon does not simply channel psychic energy, it burns it. It combusts the very essence of a psyker, their soul stuff, their consciousness, their identity, and converts it into a raw, transmutable light. The process is one of absolute consumption. Each psyker connected to the great machine experiences their very being pulled from their body, molecule by spiritual molecule, and fed into a psychic furnace. Their life, their memories, their pain, it is all rendered down into a single, pure signal, a guiding star broadcast across the hellish tides of the warp. It is a sacrifice of the self on the most fundamental level imaginable. Janus had no time to process the horror. He was seized by robed tech priests, their faces hidden behind impassive brass masks, and attendants from the Adeptus Ministorum. He was stripped, his body anointed with oils that stung and burned his skin. Ritual sigils were painted onto his flesh, each one a circuit diagram for the soul, marking him as property of the machine. He was then laid upon a cold metal slab as a surgeon adept approached, a multi-limbed creature of metal and ancient flesh. The surgery began. It was not a procedure of healing, but of opening. With whirring drills and humming psychic scalpels, the surgeon adept dismantled the carefully constructed barriers in Janus's mind, the mental walls that every psyker is taught to build to protect themselves from the horrors of the warp. He was being laid bare, his consciousness flayed open and exposed. He would not be a channel, protected and insulated. He would be a raw, open conduit. The final connections were made. Neural plugs were hammered into his spine and skull. Shimmering psychic conduits, like threads of spun glass, were attached to the sigils on his body. And then he was lifted into the air, his own suspension field crackling to life. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the system activated. It was like a dam breaking in his soul. The unified, screaming consciousness of the 10,000 other psychers in the choir crashed into his unprotected mind. He was no longer Janus. He was a single drop in an ocean of agony. He felt their collective torment, centuries of accumulated suffering pouring into him. He felt the minds of those who had been here for years, their identities eroded to nothing but a single, sustained note of pain. He felt the terror of the newly initiated like himself, a fresh chorus of screams joining the eternal orchestra. And then he felt the pull. It was a gentle tug at first, a curious pressure at the core of his being. Then it grew stronger, a relentless, irresistible suction. It was the Astronomicon, drawing its first taste of his soul. He felt a filament of his own essence, a memory of his childhood, being pulled away, unraveling, and igniting into a flash of pure, white-hot light. And in that blinding moment of agony, the most terrible truth of all slammed into him. The system was keeping him lucid. It was preventing him from fainting, from retreating into madness, from finding any escape. The machine required a conscious, aware mind to function. He would feel this. He would feel all of this every single moment until there was nothing left of him to burn. The burning is not swift. It is a slow, meticulously managed process of dissolution. Janus, now a chorister in the Great Machine, learned this truth in the endless moment after his installation. The adepts who oversee the Astronomicon are masters of their craft. They have calculated the precise rate of consumption that extracts the maximum luminance from a soul before it gutters out. The average psyker lasts 11 months. Some, with weaker wills or volatile minds, flare and are consumed in weeks, their agony a brief, spectacular nova. A few, cursed with formidable constitutions, can endure for years, their prolonged torment a testament to their own resilience. But the outcome is always the same. All are rendered to ash and light. All of them burn. For Janus, time ceased to be a river and became a stagnant, boiling sea. He existed in a state of excruciating limbo, a twilight between full consciousness and the mercy of a coma. The machine's design was diabolical in its perfection. It kept his mind just lucid enough to perceive, to feel, to suffer, but denied him the coherence to retreat into the shelter of madness. His physical body, a shriveling husk suspended in an energy field, was a distant memory. He could no longer command it to scream or thrash. His motor functions were a circuit that had been permanently shut down. He could only exist and feel and burn. The pain was a symphony, a complex and layered agony that defied all language. It was the feeling of being flayed alive while simultaneously drowning in molten metal. It was the sensation of every nerve ending being systematically ignited, while his very bones were ground to dust. But worse than the physical analog was the metaphysical reality. Through his shattered psychic senses, he felt his own soul being unraveled. He perceived the Astronomicon's light not as something external, but as an extension of himself. He was the beacon. A memory of his mother's face was stripped away, and in the void, a ship 1,000 light-years away corrected its course. A cherished feeling of friendship from his youth was siphoned off, and it became a flicker of guidance for a fleet plunging through the maelstrom. He was being unmade, his identity used as fuel, his existence converted into a navigational aid. Over the months, the being that was Janus began to erode. First to go were the complex memories, the long narratives of his life. Then, the simpler ones, blurred and faded. His personality, his quirks, his fears and hopes, they were all stripped away, layer by layer, like parchment being scraped clean. He forgot the names of his tutors. He forgot the face of the man who brought him to the black ships. Eventually, he forgot his own name. All that remained was the pain, the light, and a shrinking core of awareness that knew only that it was suffering. By the 8th month, there was nothing left that could be called Janus. There was only a spark, a tiny, terrified ember of consciousness trapped in the heart of the inferno, knowing nothing but the continuous, agonizing process of its own consumption. Then came the end. He felt the machine's pull intensify, a final, hungry draw on the last dregs of his essence. The remaining fragments of his soul, the very bedrock of his being, were torn loose in a single, violent rush. For one infinitesimal moment, he experienced an agony so absolute, so transcendent, it eclipsed everything that had come before. It was the pain of total non-existence, the scream of a soul being utterly annihilated. And then, silence, a profound and final nothing. Far below, in the disposal shafts of the Imperial Palace, a desiccated corpse was unceremoniously ejected from its suspension field and incinerated. But Janus had not truly died. He had been dispersed. His consciousness, his final, silent scream, had been shattered into a trillion motes of light. scattered across the galaxy he had been sacrificed to save. Every ship that followed the Emperor's light was, in some small way, being guided by the last echo of his unending agony. From the sanctioned, holy agony of the Imperium's heart, we travel to the cold, outer darkness, to a threat that predates humanity itself. We move from a death that serves the Emperor to one that serves only a silent, cosmic hunger. This is the horror of the enslavers, warp entities so utterly inimical to life that they nearly scoured the galaxy clean of it once before, and they are always waiting for a chance to do it again. The story begins millions of years ago, during the cataclysmic war in heaven. The Old Ones, masters of creation, battled the soulless Necrons in a conflict that shattered galaxies. In their desperation, the Old Ones engineered psychic races to use as living weapons, flooding the material universe with the raw energy of the warp. They tore open a wound in reality, and through that wound, things began to crawl. These were not demons, for demons are born of emotion and thought. These were something older, colder, and far more parasitic. The enslavers. What makes them so uniquely terrifying is their method. A demon of chaos might possess you, corrupt your soul, and wear your body like a suit. It wants to cohabitate, to experience, to twist you into a servant. An enslaver has no such interests. It doesn't want to live in you. It wants to use you as a door. When an enslaver finds a psyker, it forces its way into real space, through their mind and body, tearing their physical and metaphysical form apart in the process. The victim isn't a host. They become a gateway, a living, screaming portal for a being of pure psychic dominance to step into the material plane. Now, fast forward 60 million years. The scene is a remote Imperial research station, designated Outpost Epsilon 7, drifting in the silent void at the edge of the halo stars. Here, Magos Biologius Vera Costas, a dedicated and brilliant agent of the Adeptus Mechanicus, leads a small team. Their mission: to study Xenos artifacts recovered from dead worlds, seeking forgotten technologies for the glory of the machine god. The station is a lonely speck of light in an ocean of black, home to 67 souls, researchers, technicians, and a handful of Skitarii guards. For months, Magos Costas has been fixated on a single discovery. It is a crystalline latticework of unknown material, recovered from a world so ancient its star had long since died. The structure pulses with a faint internal light, and its geometry seems to defy conventional physics. It predates the Imperium, the Eldar, even the rise of humanity by millions of years. Castus believes it to be a relic of the war in heaven, a priceless artifact. She is correct. What she doesn't know is that the crystal is not a tool or a data slate. It is an egg, a prison, and deep within its matrix, an enslaver seed lies dormant, waiting for the one thing that can wake it, the touch of a psychic mind. Assisting her is a man named Adept Theron, a minor psyker culled by the Black Ships, but deemed too weak for astropathic training and too stable for the Astronomicon. His low-grade telepathic abilities are useful for resonance testing, for gently probing alien devices to see if they react to psychic stimuli. He is a living instrument, a tool for the Magos to wield. He has no idea that his faint psychic spark is about to act as a lit fuse for a galactic bomb. The seed has waited for eons, and in Adept Theron, it has finally found its key. The routine scan began as all the others had. In the sterile quiet of the observation chamber, Magos Costas gave the command, and Adept Theron closed his eyes, extending his faint psychic senses toward the ancient crystal. He was a living probe, his mind a delicate instrument meant to brush against the artifact and record its response. For a moment, There was nothing. Just the familiar cold hum of the station and the faint, alien resonance of the crystal. Then, something changed. It wasn't a sound or a vision. It was a feeling of attention. Something on the other side of reality, in the roiling chaos of the warp, suddenly turned its gaze upon him. It was a gaze without heat or malice, a gaze as cold and empty as the void between galaxies. It was impossibly vast, ancient, and deeply, terribly hungry. Theron's training screamed at him to pull back, to slam his mental barrier shut, but there was no time. The attention wasn't a prelude to an attack. The attention was the attack. Before he could even form a thought of resistance, the enslaver began to force its way through. The transformation was not a mutation, it was a deconstruction. Theron's body began to swell, his skin stretching taut over a form that was pushing outward from within. A scream tried to escape his lips, but it was cut short as his jawbone cracked and unhinged, widening his mouth into an impossible silent O. His eyes, wide with a terror beyond human comprehension, bulged from their sockets for a horrifying second before they burst in a spray of vitreous fluid. From the empty, bloody hollows, new sensory organs began to sprout, crystalline stalks that pulsed with an internal violet light, seeing not light or color, but the flow of psychic energy. From Theron's perspective, he was not dying. That would have been a mercy. His consciousness was being shoved into a corner of his own mind, made a helpless spectator, as his body was unmade. He felt every bone snap and reform into alien geometries. He felt his nervous system being hijacked, rewired not to carry his own signals, but to serve as a biological conduit for the thing that was coming through. The pain was absolute, but it was secondary to the violation. He was being hollowed out. The true horror began when his torso split open. It wasn't the wet tearing of flesh. It was a clean, geometric fissure that opened down his sternum. There were no organs inside, no blood, no bone, no viscera. Where his heart and lungs should have been, there was now a hole. A perfect, shimmering aperture that looked into another place. A swirling vortex of non-colors and impossible shapes. A direct wound in the fabric of real space. His body was no longer a body. It had become a doorway. 17 minutes after the scan began, the process was complete. The enslaver was through. What was once adept Theron was now a grotesque, living portal, a fleshy, organic archway, still vaguely human in shape, its unhinged mouth still screaming silently, its new eyes scanning the room with cold intelligence. Theron's mind was still in there, trapped in the ruin of his own flesh, aware of the cold wind of the warp blowing through the hole in his chest. The creature, a floating, bladder-like entity of shifting psychic light, pulsed once. A wave of pure mental dominance washed over the station. The 66 other crew members, Magos Castis, her technicians, the Skitarii guards, all stopped what they were doing. The light in their eyes went out, their wills extinguished as if they had never been. They turned, in perfect unison, and faced the enslaver. Their new master had arrived. Their bodies were no longer their own, and their first command was simple. Find more psychers. Bring them here. The enslaver needed to open more doors. For Adept Theron, existence had become a state beyond the definitions of life or death. His body, or what was left of it, was no longer his own. It was a piece of architecture, a permanent, screaming gateway maintained by the enslaver's will. His consciousness, still perfectly intact, was a prisoner within this biological archway, forced to witness the cold, uncaring reality of the warp that now flowed through the hole in his chest. He was no longer a person. He was a location. The worst part was the transits. Occasionally, the enslaver would use his portal body to bring through additional, smaller entities from the immaterium. Theron could feel each one as it passed through him. It was a sensation that had no physical equivalent. It was not pain. It was metaphysical violation, his very soul being used as a key in a lock, his essence scraped and abraded by the passage of things that should not exist in real space. From this horrific vantage point, he watched the infestation spread. The 66 other crew members, including the once brilliant Magos Vera Castus, were now perfect puppets. They moved with an eerie, silent efficiency, their minds hollowed out and filled with the enslaver's single driving purpose. They repaired the station's shuttles, plotted courses to nearby inhabited worlds, and began their hunt. Each captured psyker was brought back to the station, dragged before Theron's gurgling, fleshy portal, and subjected to the same horrific transformation. Within weeks, the station was a nexus of gateways, a dozen screaming organic portals warping the very fabric of the local system. The enslaver was multiplying. The cascade accelerated. The dominated crews used Imperial ships to carry their plague to the stars. On the mining moon of Cygnus X4, they rounded up a latent psyker family of 5 new portals. On the hive world of Pallidea, they infiltrated the underlevels, capturing unsanctioned telepaths by the score. 100 new portals. The enslavers didn't need armies. They turned their victims into their method of reproduction. Within 3 months, 17 worlds in the sector had fallen silent, their populations reduced to mindless thralls serving their new masters. Within a year, the entire sector was a ghost zone, a puppet kingdom ruled by the cold, psychic will of the entities from beyond. The Imperium's response, when it finally came, was as swift as it was absolute. An Ordo Malleus Inquisitor, assessing the scale of the infestation, declared the entire sector perdita. The judgment was exterminatus. A fleet from Battlefleet Scarus arrived, their ships blotting out the stars. They did not deploy troops. They did not attempt reclamation. They unleashed cleansing fire on a scale that defied imagination. Cyclonic torpedoes cracked planetary crusts. Virus bombs reduced continents of thralls to undifferentiated sludge. Lance batteries sliced hive spires in half. Billions of souls, both enslaved and untouched, were extinguished to prevent the enslaver plague from spreading one system further. Theron's station, the point of origin, was the first target. Through his new crystalline eyes, he watched the Imperial cruiser grow from a point of light into a mountain of Gothic steel. He felt no hope. He felt nothing but the cold, endless violation of his being. A lance strike, a beam of pure, sun-hot energy, lanced across the void and struck the station. For 1/10 of a second, Theron's portal body was engulfed in fire hotter than a star's core. And then, it was gone. His consciousness, after a year of unimaginable torment, was finally released. But released to what? What becomes of a soul that has been stretched, torn, and used as a doorway to hell? Does it return to the warp, finally free? Or does it remain what it was forced to become? A permanent, gaping wound in the immaterium, an eternally open passage, forever screaming as alien thoughts and hostile entities continue to pass through it. The galaxy is full of millions of psykers. The enslavers are patient, and they are always watching. Every one of them is a potential Theron, a living door waiting for the wrong thing to notice it has a key. We arrive at our second-to-last entry, and for this one, we turn away from the cold hunger of Xenos and the sanctified cruelty of the Imperium. We turn to chaos itself. Because the most insidious thing about the Dark Gods isn't just what they do to their enemies. It's what they do to their most loyal followers. The rewards for serving chaos are unimaginable power and immortality. But the price of failure isn't a quick death. It's a fate so awful that it makes you wonder why anyone would ever roll those dice in the first place. This is the horror of becoming a chaos spawn. Our subject is Champion Darios Vel of the Emperor's Children. A veteran of the Long War, Darios has served Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Excess, for 9,000 years. He was there when Fulgrim fell. He marched on Terra. In the millennia since, he has carved a bloody path across 1,000 worlds, a whirlwind of pastel armor, sonic weaponry, and exquisite cruelty. He is a master of sensation, an artist whose medium is suffering. Aboard his warship, the Gilded Agony, drifting through the hallucinatory madness of the Eye of Terror, Darios stands on the precipice of his final reward. He has committed atrocities that would make a dark Eldar Archon blush. He has bathed in the psychic screams of entire civilizations. He has felt the gaze of his god upon him, and he knows, with the unshakable arrogance of a 9,000-year-old demigod, that his time has come. He is ready for ascension. Let me explain the deal a Chaos Champion makes. You devote your life, your soul, and your every waking moment to one of the 4 great powers. In return, you are granted gifts, mutations, power, your god's favor. If you prove worthy, if your offerings are grand enough, if your devotion is absolute, you can achieve the ultimate prize, demonhood. You shed your mortal form and are reborn as a demon prince, an immortal being of immense power, second only to the Primarchs themselves. But the path is a razor's edge. For every single champion who achieves this glorious apotheosis, thousands upon thousands fail. They are judged unworthy. Their ambition outstrips their ability. Their offering is found wanting, or perhaps the god is simply in a foul mood. And when a champion fails, they don't just get a rejection letter, they devolve. Darios cannot conceive of failure. He has received visions from Slaanesh, whispers of glory promising him a throne at the Dark Prince's side. All he needs is one final, magnificent offering. He leads his war band, the Decadent Host, to the pleasure world of Signia Minor, a planet dedicated to art, beauty, and peaceful indulgence. It is the perfect canvas. For 3 days and 3 nights, Darios orchestrates a masterpiece of slaughter. This isn't the brutal, artless killing of Khorne's berserkers. It is a symphony of terror. Sonic weapons liquefy priceless statues and the people admiring them. Hallucinogenic gas turns galleries into charnel houses of paranoia and fear. Every sensation, from the most exquisite pleasure to the most profound agony, is amplified, twisted, and offered up to the great enemy. Finally, it is done. Billions are dead, their last moments of terror and ecstasy a psychic beacon in the warp. Darios Vel stands in the shattered ruins of the capital's central plaza, his polished armor reflecting the burning sky. He has given Slaanesh a masterpiece. He closes his eyes, raises his arms, and waits for the promised glory. He feels a surge of power, a current of raw warp energy flowing into him. It begins. But the sensation, the sheer feeling of it, is not what he expected. The first sensation is exactly what a devotee of Slaanesh would expect. It is pleasure, a wave of pure, ecstatic energy that floods every cell of Darios Vel's body. This is it, the culmination of 9 millennia of devotion. Power, raw and untamed, flows into him from the warp, a direct gift from the Dark Prince. He feels his body beginning to change, to swell with this new, divine energy. He raises his arms in triumph, a silent scream of victory on his lips, waiting for the glorious wings to sprout, for his form to be elevated to that of a god. He's ready. Instead, his arms just keep stretching. The bones elongate with a series of wet, popping sounds, the flesh pulling taut like overinflated skin. His hands, which once held a master-crafted power sword, split apart, fingers multiplying and writhing into fleshy tentacles. The pleasure doesn't stop, but it becomes something else. It intensifies beyond any mortal capacity, beyond the engineered limits of his Astartes nervous system, tipping over the edge from ecstasy into a new dimension of agony. It's the feeling of every nerve ending being set on fire, but the fire is made of pure bliss, and it is burning him alive. Slaanesh has answered his offering, but the answer is no. This is the ultimate cosmic joke of chaos. When the dark gods deem a champion unworthy of ascension, they don't simply strike them down. They give them exactly what they asked for: power, but without the stabilizing grace of true demonic apotheosis. It is a tidal wave of raw warp energy poured into a mortal vessel, with no instruction manual and no off switch. The result is devolution, uncontrolled, cancerous mutation. The body becomes a canvas for the warp's madness, flesh twisting, bones snapping and reforming, new limbs and organs growing and receding without purpose or design. Dario screams, and the sound is no longer the disciplined war cry of a space marine, but a gurgling, inhuman shriek. His armor, the glorious pearl and violet plate he has maintained for 9,000 years, an artifact covered in the trophies of dead heroes and the sigils of forgotten campaigns, begins to crack. The ceramite groans and shatters as his form expands and contorts beneath it, pieces of his own history falling away into the dust. His enhanced Astartes physiology, a marvel of bioengineering designed to resist mutation and injury, now becomes his greatest curse. It fights the transformation every step of the way, refusing to yield, which only serves to prolong the process, ensuring he feels every single agonizing moment as his own body tears itself apart from the inside out. His warband, the decadent host, watches in a mixture of awe and dawning horror. These are killers and sadists who have followed him through hell, but they recognize what is happening. A few take a step forward, perhaps to help, but are stopped by the wiser veterans. They know a chaos spawn in the making when they see one. These creatures are mindless, dangerous, and eternally hungry. Whatever Darius Vel is becoming, it is no longer their champion. It is a weapon, or worse, a liability. They begin to back away, their expressions shifting from loyalty to cold, practical assessment. And the worst part? The most exquisitely cruel detail in Slaanesh's grand design? Darius is aware through all of it. His mind, the proud, arrogant intellect of a legionnaire who walked with a Primarch, is still intact, a terrified passenger in a body gone mad. He feels himself forgetting things, not memories, but fundamental concepts. He tries to formulate a tactical assessment of his situation, but the thoughts dissolve into a soup of raw sensation. He tries to speak his own name, but his tongue has become a prehensile limb, and the part of his brain that forms language is being overwritten by a primal, overwhelming hunger. He is still Darius Vel, and he is watching himself cease to be. Most chaos spawn are granted the mercy of oblivion. Their minds dissolve in the torrent of mutation, leaving behind nothing but a mindless beast of instinct and hunger, a rabid attack dog for a chaos warband. But Darius Vel is not so fortunate. In a final, exquisitely cruel twist of irony, Slaanesh, the god of sensation and experience, chose to preserve the one thing that would make his new existence a living hell: his consciousness. What Darius has become is a walking blasphemy, a tumorous mass of flesh that defies all biological law. He is a cacophony of limbs, a riot of mismatched anatomy. At any given moment, he might have 12 legs, or 3, or none at all, propelling his bulk forward on slithering tentacles. His skin is a canvas of constant change, cycling through iridescent colors and weeping textures. He's covered in eyes, hundreds of them, each one a different size and shape, and they do not just see the material world. They see the roiling, screaming insanity of the warp, a constant visual assault that would shatter any sane mind. But Darius's mind is no longer sane. It is simply present, trapped. Deep inside this chaos of flesh, the proud champion of the Emperor's children remains. He remembers his name. He remembers his ambition, his arrogance, his absolute certainty that he was destined for godhood. And now he knows, with a clarity that is its own form of torture, that this is his reward. This is the apotheosis he earned for 9,000 years of devoted slaughter. The hunger is the worst part. It is a physical presence, a gnawing abyss in the center of his being. A chaos spawn's body is in a state of perpetual, cancerous growth, and it requires an impossible amount of energy to sustain. Darius feels an overwhelming, biological imperative to consume. When his former warband unleashes him on a hab block, he is not just killing, he is feeding. He experiences the act through dozens of mouths at once, each one tasting and feeling in a different way. His Slaaneshi-enhanced senses, once a source of exquisite pleasure, now turn every meal into a symphony of torment. He tastes the terror of his victims, feels the texture of their souls as he shreds them, and the resulting sensory input is so overwhelming, so intensely pleasurable, that it becomes an agony beyond comprehension. Eventually, his warband moves on. After a particularly bloody raid on an imperial shrine world, they simply board their ships and leave. They don't even grant him the dignity of an execution. They just abandon him, leaving him to wander the corpse-strewn ruins like a broken piece of siege equipment. And Darius, the part of him that is still Darius, understands their logic. He would have done the same thing. A spawn is a tool and a liability. But the understanding doesn't numb the pain. He had brothers in that warband, warriors who had fought at his side for millennia, since the days the Legion was whole. Now, to them, he is just another monster. He is alone, a king of a dead world, trapped in a body that is a prison, with nothing but the memories of who he was and the all-consuming hunger for what he must now become. For 700 years, Darius Vel has been a monster. He no longer counts the passage of time in solar cycles or campaign durations, but in the lulls between feedings. In that time, by the most conservative estimates of the few imperial savants who have ever studied his path of destruction, he has consumed approximately 2 million living beings. Humans, Xenos, even other followers of chaos who were too slow or too weak to escape his path. Each soul, each pound of flesh, does not simply sustain him. It fuels the cancerous evolution of his form. With every city he devours, he grows larger, more grotesquely mutated, and more inextricably trapped within the prison of his own body. He now hulks in the cratered remains of a planetary capital. The last screams died out days ago. The immediate, gnawing hunger has subsided into a dull, throbbing ache, and in this rare moment of quiet, something flickers in the depths of the beast's consciousness. A thought, coherent and sharp, cuts through the static of instinct. It is a name, Darius. The memory is an avalanche. He remembers the Third Legion, the perfect city of Chemos, the glory of the Great Crusade. He remembers the sublime agony of the Maraviglia, the fall of Istvan, the long, bloody road to Terra. He remembers his ambition, a fire that burned for 9 millennia, the unshakable belief that he would ascend, that he would become a prince of the Dark Prince's court. He was Darios Vel, champion of Slaanesh, lord of the gilded host, and he was on the cusp of divinity. He tries to look down at himself, but he has no single set of eyes, no neck to turn. Instead, 100 different perspectives show him the truth. He is a mountain of weeping flesh and twitching tentacles, a continent of meat sprawling across the ruins of a city he just ate. He is dozens of meters across, a landscape of biological horror. The champion's mind, pristine and proud, looks upon the body of the monster and understands. This is his apotheosis. This is his reward. He has to scream. The impulse is primal, human. It is a shriek of pure, undiluted horror at the absolute cosmic joke of his own existence. He gathers what was once his will, focuses it, and pushes the sound out. But it is not a scream. It is not a voice at all. From the dozens of mouths that dot his body, some lipless and round, others lined with needle-like teeth, one a great vertical gash that splits his torso, comes a symphony of nightmares. A wet, guttural chittering, a high-pitched sonic wail, a low, bubbling roar, and the sound of grinding bone, all at once. It is the sound of something that was once a man, filtered through the biology of a hell that has become flesh. And then, as quickly as it came, the moment of clarity is gone. The hunger returns. It is not a thought, but a physical force, a gravitational pull from the pit of his being, dragging his consciousness back down into the depths. The memories of Darios Vel fade, becoming distant echoes. All that remains is the need to eat, the need to grow. He could exist like this forever. A chaos spawn does not age. It does not weaken. Its warp-infused flesh can regenerate from all but the most catastrophic wounds. He is a self-sustaining engine of mutation and consumption. But the darkest truth, the final nail in the coffin of his soul, is this: Slaanesh is watching. The Dark Prince did not discard Darios. The god is enjoying his torment. Every flash of lucidity, every moment of horror as the champion remembers what he has lost, is a spike of the most exquisite sensation, a perfect offering. Darios was never rejected. He was simply transformed into a more entertaining servant. His eternal suffering is not a punishment for his failure. It is the ultimate reward for his devotion. We have arrived at the final entry, the #1 most painful way to die in the 40th millennium. And it is saved for last, because it is, perhaps, the most insidious torment the galaxy has ever conceived. It involves no physical pain, no demonic corruption, no bodily transformation, no consumption of the soul. It is a fate of absolute purity, a horror distilled to its most fundamental element, a conscious mind, a single moment, and an eternity in which to experience it. This is the horror of the stasis field. We return to the image that began our journey. Brother Captain Aldrich of the Silver Skulls, his power armor gleaming even within its crystalline prison. His face is locked in a mask of absolute fury and despair, his mouth open in a scream that has been silent for 300 years. His eyes, the only part of him that seem to possess any life, are 2 burning points of light. They are aware. They are watching. And after 3 centuries of unblinking, unchanging imprisonment, they are still thinking. The story of his damnation is tragically simple. During a boarding action against the Chaos warship known as the Eternal Torment, Aldrich and his veteran squad were ambushed and overwhelmed. His battle brothers met their ends under the chain axes and bolters of the enemy, a death that Aldrich would now consider a mercy beyond imagining. But he, the commander, the prize, was not granted such an escape. The warband's sorcerer, a being of exquisite cruelty, saw in the brother captain not an enemy to be slain, but a monument to be erected. Aldrich was captured, and with a whispered incantation, he was placed within a stasis field on the bridge of the warship, not as a prisoner to be interrogated, but as a trophy, a decoration. Stasis technology is common in the Imperium, used to preserve relics, transport dangerous artifacts, or hold prisoners in suspended animation. It freezes time for whatever is held within its field. But the device holding Aldrich is different. It is a perversion, a bespoke instrument of torture crafted by a master of the esoteric. It has been deliberately and precisely calibrated. It freezes his body down to the last molecule, locking him in a single, agonizing moment of defiance. But it was tuned to a specific quantum frequency that allows for one thing to continue unabated: his consciousness. He cannot move. He cannot speak. He cannot feel the armor encasing his body, or the air that will never again enter his lungs. He cannot even shift his gaze from the single, unchanging view of the Chaos warship's command deck. But he can think. He can remember. He can feel the crushing, monolithic weight of every single second as it passes, stretching into minutes, hours, days, years, and now, centuries. This is why stasis imprisonment is the ultimate horror. The other fates on this list, for all their brutality, involve change. The body is violated, the mind is broken, the soul is consumed. But here, there is nothing. Aldrich's body is perfectly preserved. His mind is perfectly intact. He is trapped not in a prison of metal or energy, but in a prison of time itself. He has been fully aware, fully conscious, for 300 standard years, and unless the eternal torment is finally destroyed, he will be aware for eternity. He is a ghost in his own statue, a mind entombed in the amber of a single, unending moment. The first year was pure, undiluted rage. Aldrich, a being forged in the crucible of war and indoctrinated with unyielding purpose, found himself utterly powerless. He screamed in the silent cathedral of his own skull, a psychic bellow of such intensity it should have cracked the very crystal that contained him. He marshaled every ounce of his transhuman will, every catechism of fury, every lesson in determination learned over a century of service, and threw it against the walls of his prison. His mind was a tempest of violence. He imagined breaking free, tearing the sorcerer limb from limb, painting the bridge of the eternal torment with the blood of his captors. He would not be broken. He would not yield. He was a captain of the Adeptus Astartes, and he would have his vengeance. But the prison did not yield. The moment did not change. The rage, for all its titanic force, accomplished nothing. And when the fire finally burned low, it left behind only the cold, gray ash of grief. The second year was a quiet, internal funeral. He mourned his fallen brothers, replaying their final moments, seeing their faces as they were cut down. He mourned his chapter, the Silver Skulls, for he was a resource they had now lost forever. Most profoundly, he grieved for himself. He had been a rising star, a commander of men, a warrior with a destiny that could have led him to the highest echelons of chapter command. All that potential, all that future, was now a ghost. He was a statue, a curiosity, his life's purpose reduced to nothing. After the grief came the discipline. An Astartes does not surrender to despair. For the next 8 years, Aldrich turned his mind into a fortress. He began a series of brutal mental exercises, anything to occupy the terrifying emptiness. He recited the entirety of the Codex Astartes from memory, a process that took a subjective 3 months. He constructed a memory palace of his chapter's fortress monastery, populating it with every battle brother he had ever known, walking its halls and speaking with their shades. He composed epic poems glorifying the Emperor and his Primarch. He designed and fought 1,000 theoretical battles, pitting his tactical acumen against imaginary orc wars and Eldar war hosts. He was a mind adrift, but he would be a disciplined mind. But time is a solvent that can dissolve even the adamantium will of a space marine. Sometime between the 10th and 50th year, the desperation began to set in. He had exhausted his memories. He had recited the Codex so many times, the words had lost all meaning. The battles in his head grew stale, the outcomes predictable. His mind, with no new input, began to circle back on itself. Thoughts repeated, first in cycles of days, then hours, then minutes. He was wearing grooves into his own consciousness, his psyche eroding under the constant, frictionless passage of the same mental routines. It was in the long, slow century that followed that true despair finally took root. The intellectual possibility of eternal imprisonment became an emotional certainty. He came to a cold, clear, and utterly horrifying realization. No one was coming. His chapter would have listed him as killed in action, his name etched onto a memorial wall and his deeds relegated to the archives. The eternal torment was a phantom ship, lost in the hellscape of the Eye of Terror. It might never be found, never be destroyed. He was simply gone, erased from the living galaxy, existing only as a frozen scream in a forgotten trophy room. The rage was gone. The grief was a distant echo. The discipline had failed. All that was left was the horrifying, placid understanding that this single, unchanging moment might very well be his forever. By the 150th year of his imprisonment, Aldrich's mind had settled into a terrible, grinding routine. He had to impose order on the timeless void, or it would consume him whole. He created a day where there was none. Mornings were for discipline. He would recite, from start to finish, the entire text of the Codex Astartes. The words, once a source of strength and tactical wisdom, were now just a sequence of sounds in his mind, a familiar path to walk to keep from getting lost. Afternoons were for war. He would replay every battle he had ever fought, analyzing each decision, exploring every alternative. He ran simulations against imaginary foes, his mind a lonely command deck where victories and defeats had no meaning. Evenings were reserved for prayer, but after more than a century of silence, the prayers had changed. He no longer prayed for rescue. He no longer prayed for vengeance. He simply prayed. A ritual of devotion to an emperor he was no longer certain could hear him, a whisper into a void that never answered back. He was not entirely alone. Through his frozen, unchanging gaze, he watched the crew of the eternal torment live their lives. They were his captors, but they were also his only company. He learned their names from their shouted arguments, their faces from their drunken celebrations. He saw them bring new captives aboard, their brief, terrified struggles a stark contrast to his own silent eternity. And he knew, with an intimacy that felt like a violation, the sorcerer Vortigern, the man who had put him here. Aldrich had watched Vortigern age, watched him conduct his rituals, listened to his pronouncements on the bridge. In the quiet moments of his mental day, Aldrich had composed 17,000 different ways to kill him. Each one was a masterpiece of violence, a detailed, step-by-step plan for deconstruction. It was the last vestige of the warrior he had been, a flicker of cold fury in the endless dark. But 2 centuries is an eternity for a mind built for action. Around that mark, something fundamental began to shift. The indoctrination that had been the bedrock of his existence started to feel distant. The catechisms of duty and honor, the unwavering loyalty to his Primarch and chapter. They were becoming like memories of a different person, a story he had once read about a hero named Aldrich. He could still recite the oaths, but the feeling behind them, the absolute conviction, had begun to fade. He was a space marine. He was a silver skull. He knew these things as facts, but they no longer felt like truths. The question began to haunt the quiet spaces in his mind. Was he still Aldrich? Or was he just a pattern of thoughts, an echo of a man who had died on this bridge 200 years ago? The final erosion came near the 250th year. It was a new and unique kind of horror, more subtle and profound than any torment he had yet endured. He was trying to visualize his own face, a simple mental exercise he had performed countless times. And he couldn't. The image was gone. His physical form was locked behind him, unseen, unchanging. But his own mental picture of himself had blurred into nothing. He could remember the feeling of his helmet locking into place, the sensation of his armor's ceramite shell. But the face beneath it, the features that had once looked back at him from polished steel, they were lost. He knew abstractly that he had been a man. He had been strong, had been powerful, had been real, but the specifics were dissolving, washed away by the relentless, featureless tide of time. All that was being replaced by the single, crushing reality of his prison, the unchanging view of a corridor on a Chaos warship, forever. 300 years into his imprisonment, Brother Captain Aldrich has reached a state of terrible equilibrium. The rage that sustained him for his first century has burned itself out, leaving only cold ash. The grief that followed has been wept dry in the silence of his mind. Even the despair, that final crushing weight, has become too heavy an emotion to bear. He no longer rages, he no longer grieves, he simply exists. His thoughts, once a torrent of tactical analysis and furious vengeance, now move in slow, meandering patterns. They are like ancient rivers that have carved the same channels through a landscape of memory for so long that their banks are worn perfectly smooth. There are no new ideas, only the endless repetition of old ones. His field of vision has not changed in 3 centuries. It is the same section of the warship's bridge, the same collection of grotesque trophies and blasphemous icons bolted to the walls. Occasionally, figures move through this static diorama. The descendants of the Chaos Marines who captured him, or perhaps even some of the same long-lived traitors, their forms twisted by the blessings of the dark gods. He barely registers them anymore. They are no longer his captors, no longer objects of his hatred. They are simply part of the scenery, as insignificant as the corrosion on the deck plates or the flicker of a failing lumen globe. They are movement without meaning, sound without context. The universe outside his crystalline prison has become an abstraction, a play of light and shadow that has no bearing on the eternal, unchanging reality of his own mind. What remains of Aldrich is awareness, a pure, crystalline consciousness, stripped of stimulus, of change, of hope. He has had 300 years to contemplate the nature of his cage. He knows, with the absolute certainty born of endless contemplation, that this will never end. He has watched the sorcerer Vortigern, or his successors, perform the rituals that sustain the field. He understands now that it is not powered by simple technology, but by the raw energy of the warp itself. It is a prison woven from paradox and impossibility, as long as the eternal torment sails the tides of the immaterium, as long as its masters wish it, his moment of frozen agony will persist. The ship has survived 3 centuries of brutal warfare. Aldrich has no reason to believe it will not survive 3 more, or 3,000. Hope is a luxury for those who experience the passage of time. He does not. Is he still alive? The question has surfaced in his thoughts 1,000,000 times, and he no longer has an answer. His body is perfectly preserved, ageless, a statue of flesh and ceramite. His mind continues to function. But without new input, without growth, without any of the friction and change that define life, what is he? He is a consciousness preserved in amber, a recording of a man playing on an endless loop inside his own skull. He exists in a state that has no name, a perfect stasis between life and death, experiencing eternity, one silent, suffocating, unchanging moment at a time. And in that unending moment, one thought persists. It is the anchor that keeps the scattered fragments of his identity from dissolving entirely into the timeless void. It is the final bedrock of his soul. He has returned to it millions upon millions of times, a mental touchstone in the dark. It is not a prayer. It is not an act of defiance. It is not a declaration of hope, for he has none. It is simply all that he has left. I am Brother Captain Aldrich of the Silver Skulls. I am Brother Captain Aldrich of the Silver Skulls. I am Brother Captain Aldrich of the Silver Skulls. Looking back at these 10 fates, a single, horrifying pattern emerges. It isn't just about the intensity of the pain or the grotesque transformations. The true, unifying principle of suffering in the 41st millennium, the secret that every major power has independently discovered and weaponized, is the persistence of consciousness. Death is an escape. It's an ending. And in a galaxy this cruel, an ending is a luxury that is rarely afforded to the truly unlucky. True suffering, the kind that can fuel empires and sustain gods, requires that the victim remains perfectly, horribly aware. Think about it. Each entry we've explored is a masterclass in preventing the sweet release of oblivion. The Tyranids don't just reduce you to biomass, they absorb your consciousness, preserving screaming fragments of your identity within the gestalt of the hive mind. The Drukhari have perfected resurrection technology not to grant life, but to ensure torment is eternal. A victim of the homunculi can be killed and revived 1,000 times, their mind fully intact to appreciate each new agony. The Imperium, in its infinite, sanctified cruelty, does the same. An arco-flagellant is aware of every atrocity they are forced to commit. A sister in a penitent engine feels every kill, her own morality turned into an instrument of her torture. Chaos, of course, are the masters of this. A man transformed into an obliterator or a chaos. Spawn doesn't just become a monster. He is a prisoner inside that monster, a conscious mind trapped in a body that hungers and mutates against his will. The victim of demonic possession isn't erased. They are forced into the passenger seat of their own body, a helpless spectator to their own damnation. And at the heart of the Imperium itself, the Astronomicon doesn't run on dead psychers. It requires living, conscious souls to be burned as fuel, their awareness a necessary component for the creation of the Emperor's light. In every single case, the technology, the sorcery, or the biology exists to make sure the victim knows. This leads to the most fundamental truth about this universe. Here, suffering has weight. It has value. It isn't just an unfortunate byproduct of war. It is a resource, a currency, a form of cosmic energy. The dark gods of chaos don't just enjoy anguish. They are literally made of it. They are sustained by it. Every moment of terror, every scream of pain, every sliver of despair from a mortal soul makes them stronger. This creates a galaxy-spanning economy of torment, where powerful beings actively cultivate suffering on an industrial scale. Pain is what gives the gods their power, and consciousness is what gives that pain its value. It all comes back to that famous line, In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But that's not the whole story. War is just the most visible, the most spectacular expression of the galaxy's suffering. The real horror of 40K isn't the heroic last stand on the battlefield. It's not the quick death from a lasgun or a chainsword. The true nature of this setting is found in the quiet desperation of those who survive the battle, only to be captured. It's in the prisons, the torture chambers, and the conversion slabs. It's the realization that death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. In the 41st millennium, death is a blessing. And it's a blessing that is almost never granted. So, how do you even begin to rank these horrors? How can you possibly create a definitive hierarchy of suffering when every entry is a masterpiece of despair? It's like trying to determine which is worse, being set on fire or being buried alive. The truth is, there's no objective answer. But we can create a framework. We can analyze these fates based on a few key metrics: the duration of the torment, the intensity of the pain, the level of awareness the victim retains, the degree to which their self is destroyed, and finally, the complete and utter absence of hope. Let's start with duration and intensity, the bread and butter of agony. In this category, the Drukhari are the undisputed masters. Their entire civilization is an engine designed to prolong suffering indefinitely. A homunculus like Urian Rakarth doesn't just kill you. He kills you, resurrects you, and then finds 1,000 new ways to do it again, each more inventive than the last. Young Kira's 3 centuries of torment are a testament to this, a perfect score in both intensity and duration. By contrast, the Tyranid fate, while absolute, is a different kind of eternal. Your consciousness is shattered and absorbed, not kept whole for targeted torture. It's an eternity of being a screaming fragment in a psychic ocean, which is horrifying, but lacks the personal, intimate cruelty of a dark Eldar artist working on their favorite canvas. Next, we have awareness and the loss of self. This is where the gifts of chaos truly shine in their malevolence, transformation into a chaos. Spawn or an obliterator isn't just a physical change, it's the horror of being a prisoner in your own body. Champion Darius Vel remains lucid enough to feel horror at the mindless, mutating beast he has become. Sergeant Corvin Rax is a helpless spectator, watching through his own eyes as his body, now a walking arsenal, slaughters his former brothers. This is a unique form of hell. Your identity is intact, but your body is no longer yours. Demonic possession takes this a step further. Ilara isn't just trapped. She's in a forced cohabitation with a malevolent entity that uses her senses to experience the world and feeds on her despair. The enslaver victim, Adept Theron, arguably suffers an even greater loss of self, his body and soul twisted into a literal doorway, a piece of biological infrastructure. He ceases to be a person and becomes a place. Then there is the uniquely imperial flavor of torment, which excels in the category of hopelessness. The arco-flagellant and the penitent engine pilot are denied even the dignity of being a simple victim. Their suffering is sanctified, branded as penance. Sister Mercy, a healer by nature, is forced into a war machine where her every action is brutal, violent slaughter. She remains herself, fully aware of the moral nightmare she's trapped in, with her only hope of release being a final, violent death in battle. This is suffering with a purpose, but that purpose is not her own. Her pain serves the ecclesiarchy, her screams rebranded as a hymn to the emperor. And that brings us to the final, and perhaps purest, form of psychological torment: stasis imprisonment. Brother Captain Aldrich's fate scores low on physical intensity. He feels no pain, but it maxes out every other metric. Duration is eternal, awareness is absolute, and hope is non-existent. There is no transformation, no monstrous hunger, no external violator. There is only the self, trapped in a single unchanging moment for 300 years and counting. His mind, unable to receive new input, is forced to endlessly recycle his own thoughts, memories, and regrets until they wear smooth. It is the perfect sensory deprivation chamber, a prison for the soul itself. The others are deaths of the body or the identity. Stasis is the death of time, and for a conscious mind, that may be the most terrifying end of all. So after all that, after 10 journeys into absolute despair, you have to ask the question, why? Why is this universe so obsessed with suffering? Why is it so relentlessly, creatively cruel? It's easy to dismiss it as simple shock value, as juvenile edginess designed to make everything seem bleak and cool. But that's missing the point. These horrors aren't just seasoning sprinkled on top of the setting. They are the bedrock upon which the entire 41st millennium is built. This universe of suffering matters, because without it, nothing else makes sense. On the most practical level, these fates are the engine that drives the imperium of man. Why does the common citizen tolerate a brutal, totalitarian theocracy that demands absolute obedience and treats individual lives as utterly disposable? Because they know what the alternative is. They know that beyond the fortress walls of the Imperium lie the slave fleets of the Drukhari and the all-consuming hunger of the tyrannid hive mind. An imperial inquisitor will authorize the torture of an entire city subsector without a second thought, not because he is evil, but because he has seen what happens when a single chaos cultist opens a gate to the warp. The Imperium's own cruelty is a desperate, frantic response to the existence of far greater cruelties. Tyranny becomes a shield when the only other option is to be raw material for someone else's eternal torment. But the rabbit hole goes so much deeper. In the 41st millennium, suffering isn't just an experience, it's a resource. It has metaphysical weight. It is a form of energy that can be harvested, weaponized, and transformed into cosmic power. The Chaos Gods are not just malevolent beings who enjoy watching mortals suffer. They are vast, sentient whirlpools of emotion, and anguish is their primary food source. They are literally sustained by the pain and despair of the galaxy's inhabitants. The Eye of Terror, that great wound in reality, exists because an entire civilization's psychic excess birthed a new god. The Astronomicon, the guiding light of the Imperium, is not a metaphor. It is a soul furnace, powered by the continuous, agonizing consumption of 10,000 psychers every single day. In this universe, pain isn't just a consequence of war. Pain is power. And that brings us to the narrative. This cosmic economy of pain is what gives every story in 40K its incredible weight. Characters in this setting don't just risk death, they risk fates that make death look like a 5-star vacation. A space marine charging a chaos position isn't just fighting for victory, he's fighting to avoid becoming a chaos spawn. His mind trapped inside a mindless, mutating beast for the next 10,000 years. A guardsman holding a trench line isn't just worried about a stray last bolt. He's terrified of being captured alive and rendered down into nutrient slurry by the tyrannids, his consciousness screaming forever inside the hive mind. This raises the stakes of every single conflict to an existential level. Every battle is a struggle for the soul, not just the body. Ultimately, this is the true meaning of grimdark. It isn't about being edgy. The relentless, overwhelming horror of 40K serves a vital narrative purpose. It creates a universe where hope is precious because it is so rare, where heroism is meaningful because the alternative is so absolute. The greatest stories in this setting aren't about the horrors themselves, but about how people respond to them. It's about the single guardsman who holds the line, knowing capture means an eternity of pain. It's the sister of battle who accepts her sentence to a penitent engine rather than renounce her faith. It's about the impossible, defiant act of spitting in the face of a hopeless universe. Against a backdrop of infinite darkness, even the smallest flicker of light shines with the brilliance of a star. And so we return, for one last moment, to the bridge of the Chaos warship. Eternal torment. It drifts through the impossible, bleeding skies of the Eye of Terror, a vessel of damnation carrying its silent, frozen trophy through the realm of nightmares. Within his crystalline prison, Brother Captain Aldrich of the Silver Skulls continues to exist, his consciousness counting the endless moments that stretch out before him, a procession marching toward infinity. His fate, and the 9 that came before it, forces a final, terrible question. If you were given the choice, which would you accept? Would you choose the quick, absolute consumption of the Tyranids, your soul dissolved into the Gestalt, or the endless creative agony at the hands of a dark Eldar homunculus, your death a performance to be repeated for centuries? Is the mindless, drug-fueled slaughter of the archo-flagellant preferable to the conscious, agonizing penance of the penitent engine? Is there any path through this gallery of horrors that could be considered merciful? The answer, of course, is no. The 41st millennium has evolved beyond the concept of mercy. It is a forgotten luxury from a less practical age. Here, suffering is not an unfortunate byproduct of conflict. It is a tool, a resource, a foundational principle of the universe. The Tyranids weaponize it for strategic advantage, harvesting biomass with brutal efficiency. The Imperium sanctifies it as a holy necessity, fueling the Astronomicon with the burning souls of its own citizens. The Ecclesiarchy refines it into religious mandate, forging weapons of faith from the bodies of sinners. And for the servants of chaos and the masters of Kamarag, it is simply the highest form of art, a pleasure to be savored. Pain is the common language of the galaxy, and every major power is fluent. Yet, even in this absolute darkness, something else persists. It is not hope. It is not a promise of victory or a chance for redemption. It is something smaller, harder, and infinitely more stubborn. It is the simple act of refusal. It is Brother Captain Aldrich, after 300 years of silent imprisonment, still repeating his name and rank in his mind, refusing to let his identity dissolve into the void. It is the Psychers who walk willingly into the choir chambers of the Astronomicon, believing that their sacrifice, however agonizing, has meaning. It is even Darius, the Chaos spawn, whose fractured consciousness occasionally claws its way back to the surface, a fleeting moment of awareness that refuses total submission to the monster he has become. The human spirit, or its twisted, post-human equivalent, endures even when faced with infinite horror. It is a flicker of defiance against a universe that demands surrender. And so we end where we began, with the frozen face of a space marine, his expression of pure, unyielding rage, locked in time for 3 centuries. Somewhere in the churning chaos of the warp, he is still screaming. Not with his voice. His body is a statue, incapable of motion. He screams in the silent, eternal prison of his own mind. He screams against his captors, against his fate, against the very nature of a galaxy that would create such a torment. He is Brother Captain Aldrich of the Silver Skulls, and he refuses to surrender. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that might be the only victory possible.